desire to connect. That's what Shafak captures so beautifully.
And not just romantic love.
No, not at all. Though that's definitely there too. It's about love in all its forms, for friends, for family, even for something bigger than ourselves, something divine.
That's resonating. So how does Shafak bring these two stories, Ella and Rumi's, together?
Well, as Ella dives deeper into sweet blasphemy, she becomes captivated by Rumi's journey, particularly his connection with Shams.
And this isn't just some history lesson for her, is it?
Not at all. It starts to mirror her own feelings for Aziz, the man who gave her the manuscript.
Okay, so right from the start, we've got these parallels, these echoes between past and present.
Intriguing, right?
And I'm already guessing that Shams is going to be key to unlocking those connections.
Oh, absolutely. He's the spark that ignites Rumi's transformation, challenges everything Rumi thinks he knows about faith, about love, about life itself.
A real disruptor, then.
Oh, absolutely. Fasten your seatbelts, because Shams's arrival is about to shake things up in a big way in this story. And, when we talk about Shams shaking things up,
Oh, yeah.
it's through him that we really encounter those 40 rules of the religion of love.
Right, the heart of the novel.
Exactly. But, don't expect your typical list of rules.
I figured. With a title like that?
They're more like, whispers of wisdom,
Yeah.
a new way to see life, love, spirituality, the whole thing.
There's one that really stuck with me, and, maybe this resonates with you listening too.
Go on.
The path to the truth is a labor of the heart, not of the head. Powerful stuff.
It really is. And challenges that traditional view, the purely intellectual approach to spirituality. Shams is urging us to look inward, to feel our way through life.
Not just think our way through.
Exactly. And that's a running theme with him, isn't it? Challenging norms. Like, remember that scene
Which one?
where he sends Rumi, this devout scholar, to a tavern to fetch wine?
Oh, right. I'll admit, that threw me for a loop at first.
It's classic Shams, though, you see. These actions that seem contradictory on the surface, he's using them as opportunities for Rumi and for us to go deeper.
Deeper meaning.
Yes. It's not always about appearances or blind faith in the rules. It's the intention behind our actions that matters.
Don't just follow blindly.
Right. Think about it. This is 13th century Konya, not exactly known for its progressive thinking. So for Shams to challenge those norms so openly...
Bold move.
Bold indeed.
And speaking of Konya, Shafak really brings this city to life.
It's more than just a setting, isn't it? It's a character in its own right.
Bustling, full of life, but then there are these undercurrents of tension, secrets.
A real crossroads of cultures, religions. You feel that through the other characters, too. Rumi's family, his disciples, even Kimya, the brothel owner.
Oh, yeah, I loved how she wove those different perspectives in. Even Kimya, a hermaphrodite, really added another layer to the whole story.
Exactly. Each character enriches the tapestry of the novel, even Rumi's wife Kara grappling to understand his transformation.
And his son, Sultan Veiled, such a mix of reactions there. First skepticism, then devotion.
Shows how differently people respond to a force like Shams, like watching ripples spreading.
But not everyone welcomes those ripples, do they?
That's where the unease starts to creep in, that growing tension around Rumi and Shams.
And those mentions of the assassins definitely adds to the suspense.
Oh, absolutely. They lurk in the background, a constant reminder of the danger.
A shadow hanging over everything.
The assassins were real, shrouded in mystery. And Shafak doesn't over-explain, but their presence is unsettling. Adds a layer of foreboding.
You can just feel it, can't you? Like something's about to happen.
And then it does. Shams vanishes.
Gone. Just like that.
It leaves everyone reeling, Rumi especially.
Shafak doesn't tell us exactly what happened, does she?
No, she leaves that space open. A few hints, whispers of an encounter, a threat overheard.
The truth remains a mystery.
And I think that adds to the power of it all, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Sham's disappearance becomes this turning point. For Rumi, it's like this wellspring of grief.
But instead of consuming him,
it becomes the source of his poetry.
That's the beauty of Shafak's writing, showing how love and sorrow, they're intertwined. Rumi's connection with Shams, the joy, the pain, it all fuels his art. Reminds me that saying, suffering is inevitable, but how we transform it is our choice.
Powerful. And it makes you think about Ella's journey, too.
Right. Here she is, reading this manuscript, witnessing Rumi's transformation.
And at the same time, her own feelings for Aziz are deepening. It's like those 40 rules. They're not just words on a page anymore.
They start to permeate her own life. Those rules about embracing change, about love as a nourishing force, they challenge her, push her to see things differently.
It's like what we were talking about earlier, that yearning for something more. It connects Ella and Rumi across centuries.
And maybe even connects to us listening right now. Those timeless questions, the search for meaning, the transformative power of love. The 40 Rules of Love invites us to reflect on those things in our own lives, don't you think?
Without a doubt. This deep dive has been incredible. We've journeyed through history, spirituality, love, loss.
And we've only just scratched the surface. The 40 Rules of Love is a book that stays with you.
It sparks something, a conversation, a new perspective, a deeper understanding of ourselves.
It's fascinating how these little rules connect our inner world with something as vast as the divine.
Right. It's like this one sentence is a whole spiritual philosophy crammed into it. Okay, ready for this?
Yeah, hit me.
How we see God is a direct reflection of how we see ourselves.
Okay.
If God brings to mind mostly fear and blame, it means there's too much fear and blame welled inside us. If we see God as full of love and compassion, so are we.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
Like I'm picturing an actual mirror right now, you know?
Right.
What kind of reflection are we putting out there?
It's so profound, and it really resonates with a lot of spiritual traditions that I've encountered, but this quote just makes it so personal. It's asking, how's your relationship with yourself? Because that impacts everything else.
It really makes you think.
Yeah.
So are we saying that if someone's down on themselves, they're automatically going to have a harsher view of, the universe?
I don't think it's a direct cause and effect, but our internal state is definitely a lens through which we view things. Think about it this way. If you see the world through rose-colored glasses, everything's tinted rosy, right?
Right.
Same with our self-perception, but instead of applying it to our perception of our physical surroundings, it's applied to God, to fate, to just how the world works.
So if you feel unlucky and then something bad happens, it just proves that the universe is out to get you.
Exactly. But for someone who's maybe focusing on gratitude, those same events might be seen as opportunities for growth. It all comes back to the lens. And psychologists talk about this too, Yeah, it's like confirmation bias. We tend to see what we already believe.
So this isn't just some woo-woo spiritual thing. This is actually backed up by how our brains are working.
Absolutely. And it's not just about these big abstract ideas like God or the universe or whatever. Think about everyday interactions. If you're walking around feeling insecure, someone's neutral comment might feel like a criticism.
Oh, totally.
But with a healthy amount of self-esteem, you're less likely to take it personally.
Okay, that makes sense. So if we're working on cultivating self-compassion, that's almost like upgrading to a clearer lens.
Yeah, you could say that. And it's not about being naive. It's more about approaching yourself and the world with a little bit more grace, And research actually suggests that practicing self-compassion can lead to having more empathy for others.
Interesting.
It's that loving energy kind of ripples outward.
That's hopeful because so much of the time we're told to focused outward, help others, all this stuff. But what if taking care of our inner world is part of that?
It's not either, it's both hand. You can't pour from an empty cup, right?
Right.
So if we want to see more love and compassion out there in the world around us, maybe we need to start with ourselves.
This has me thinking, if enough of us shifted that inner lens, could we actually impact something bigger than ourselves?
It's a really interesting question.
Could humanity's collective view actually change? What do you think? Have you ever noticed this link in your own life between how you see yourself and how you experience the world?
Yeah.
Food for thought.
Ever get the feeling deep down there's this other way of figuring things out? Not just thinking our way through, but really feeling it.
It really throws a curveball at how we usually approach, truth. The path to truth, it suggests, isn't really a head thing, it's a heart thing.
Okay, now that's interesting. It almost feels counterintuitive, right? In a world that's constantly telling us to think, analyze, strategize, this rule is saying, hold on a sec, what about your heart? What's it telling you?
Exactly. And the rule itself is pretty powerful. The path to the truth is a labor of the heart, not of the head. Full stop. It's like a wake-up call.
It is, and it's so tempting to just breeze past a statement like that, but this is a deep dive. So let's unpack it. It goes on. Make your heart your primary guide, not your mind. Okay, so how do we even begin to do that? Isn't the mind our default setting?
You're hitting on something really important, that tension between the heart and the head. We're conditioned to think our way through life, to rely on logic. But what this rule is suggesting is that the heart might have its own kind of knowing.
Okay, I'm intrigued, but I also feel I need a bit of a roadmap here. How do we actually start listening to our hearts? Like, practically speaking, what does that even look like?
I'll think about it this way. Have you ever had a gut feeling about something, maybe a decision you needed to make, where your head was saying one thing, but your heart was whispering something else entirely?
Oh, all the time. Like
Well,
that time. This is a little embarrassing, but it's relevant, I promise. I was about to back out of this weekend trip at the last minute because logically it made no sense. Too much work, not enough time. But I had this like deep down urge to just go for it. And you know what? It ended up being one of the most incredible recharging weekends ever.
and that, my friend, is the heart speaking. It's those moments of intuition, of deep knowing that defies logic, those gut feelings that tell us to go for it, even when our minds are building a case for why we shouldn't.
Wow, okay. That makes a lot of sense. But then there's this other part of the rule. It gets even more intense. Meet, challenge, and ultimately prevail over your naffs with your heart.
Right. And that word nafs, it's not one we throw around every day. It's a Sufi term, and it essentially refers to our ego or lower self, that part of us that's driven by desires, insecurities, fears.
Okay, so how does the heart come into play with all of that? The ego, the naffs, it can be pretty powerful. Believe me, I know.
That it can. But think of it like this. The heart, with its capacity for compassion, empathy, understanding those qualities are like superpowers when it comes to navigating the choppy waters of the ego. It's about recognizing those ego-driven impulses, those fears and insecurities, and meeting them with, well, heart.
That's pretty profound when you think about it. It's like we're not trying to suppress or ignore the ego, but to understand it, maybe even befriend it through the lens of the heart.
Exactly. And that brings us to the final part of this rule, which takes us even deeper. Knowing your ego will lead you to the knowledge of God.
Now, this is where things get really interesting, but potentially tricky too. Because what about those of us who don't necessarily subscribe to a specific religion or belief system?
Absolutely. And that's the beauty of this quote. It speaks to something universal. Whether or not you believe in a God in a traditional sense, this idea of knowing God can be understood as connecting to something larger than ourselves, something beyond our individual egos. That could be a sense of oneness, of interconnectedness, of profound love, of universal truth, whatever resonates.
That's a really powerful way to frame it. So if we were to put this all together, this idea of the heart as a path to truth, what would you say is the biggest takeaway for our listeners?
I think the most important thing is to remember that we all have this incredible tool within us, our hearts. And while our minds are incredibly powerful and useful, there's a different kind of wisdom that resides in the heart. It's about tapping into that wisdom, about letting our hearts be our compass, our guide.
Makes you wonder, doesn't it? If we were to truly let our hearts lead the way, even for a day, how might our lives be different? What would we say yes to? What fears might we overcome? It's an invitation to explore, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And perhaps, just perhaps, on that journey of exploration, we might stumble upon truths about ourselves and about the world around us that we never could have imagined. So we don't even have the full book. It's like we have this little piece, this excerpt, and it's for the third rule of love.
Okay.
Let me just read it to you, all right?
Yeah, please.
You can study God through everything and everyone in the universe, because God is not confined in a mosque, synagogue, or church.
Right.
But if you are still in need of knowing where exactly his abode is, there is only one place to look for him: in the heart of a true lover.
Wow.
There is no one who has lived after seeing him, just like there is no one who has died after seeing him.
Oh, wow.
Whoever finds him will remain with him forever.
Okay.
Lot to unpack there.
Yeah, that's intense.
Where do we even begin?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing that stands out to me is that this rule is not literally about religious buildings, right?
Right.
It's really about a mindset. It's about how do we see God in everything. And it suggests, I think, this idea that we can learn and grow spiritually from every single thing and every single person we encounter.
So it's sort of like the world itself becomes like a sacred text.
Yeah, exactly.
And everyone we meet is like, potential teacher.
100%.
That's a pretty cool concept.
No.
Is that a common thread in a lot of different spiritual traditions?
It really is. Like, if you think about Buddhism, right?
Right.
The whole idea of mindfulness.
Yeah.
It's about, seeking enlightenment through just paying attention to the present moment. Or in Sufism, which is this mystical branch of Islam that really emphasizes love and devotion.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
There's this very strong belief that you experience the divine through, like, the beauty of creation. So yeah, it's definitely something that comes up again and again in different traditions.
It's interesting. And, speaking of finding, this rule goes on to say that we can find, God's abode specifically in the heart of a true lover.
Right.
So what is true love, according to this rule?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Because it's presented here as if we all just know what true love is, which is a huge assumption. But this idea of love as a pathway to the divine, it's not a new one. Think about Rumi, the Sufi poet, for example.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
He's famous for his writings about love and devotion. And it seems like in this rule, this idea of true love, it's not just about romantic love, right? It's something much deeper. It's like this transformative, almost mystical experience.
Yeah, and then it gets even more intense.
Right. It really does.
It says, there is no one who has lived after seeing him, just like there is no one who has died after seeing him.
Right.
What do we make of that?
It's some pretty intense language, for sure. I don't think it's meant to be taken literally, though.
Right.
It's not talking about physical death, but I think it's getting at this idea of what some people call ego death.
Oh, interesting.
Where our sense of self, our ego, kind of dissolves in the presence of something so much bigger than ourselves.
So you're saying that by experiencing this kind of all-encompassing love, this merging with something larger than ourselves, we actually find like a deeper, more true sense of self.
Exactly. It seems counterintuitive, right? But that's the paradox of it all, maybe.
Yeah, it is. So how do we actually, square this with our everyday experience?
Well, I think that's where it gets really interesting and also really challenging, because this rule doesn't give us a step-by-step guide, does it?
No, not really.
It's more like a starting point, I think. It's an invitation to look at our own lives and ask ourselves, what does it really mean to connect, truly connect with the world around us? What does it mean to experience love in this all-encompassing, transformative way? And how do we make space for that in our lives?
So one of the rules that's really got me thinking, it basically says that, intellect tends to make things super complicated, while love, on the other hand, has this way of simplifying things. What do you think about that?
Huh. Yeah, it's like our minds, right? They're always analyzing, picking things apart, trying to put everything in a neat little box.
Totally.
And sometimes that works. But then when it comes to matters of the heart, sometimes you got to just feel it, right?
Exactly. It's like when you overthink a relationship or you're trying to make a decision, but your emotions are all over the place. This rule also says intellect risks nothing, but love risks everything. It's like our heads are playing it safe, always analyzing every single angle, while our hearts, they just want to dive right in.
Head first. Exactly. Head first. So is it always an either situation, do you think? Like head versus heart?
I don't think it has to be a battle.
Yeah.
It's not always black and white. Intellect and love, they're not enemies. They're more like different parts of us. Like our intellect, it helps us make sense of the world, make smart choices.
Right. Makes sense.
But then there's love, right? Love connects us to something way deeper. It pushes us, makes us uncomfortable sometimes, encourages us to be vulnerable and, to take risks.
That reminds me of this time I had to decide whether to move across the country for a new job. My head was saying, no way, stay put. It's the logical choice. It's the safe choice. But my heart, it was like this whole other thing. I was craving adventure, new experiences. It was a tough one.
What did you end up doing?
I went for it. Followed
Wow.
my heart.
Wow.
And let me tell you, it was a roller coaster. Lots of emotions, ups and downs, the whole deal. But you know what? It turned out to be one of the best decisions I've ever made in my life. I grew in ways I never even imagined.
I love that. And it really does connect back to what we were saying, right? Like love can push you toward like real personal growth, even if it means taking a risk, maybe getting hurt.
Exactly. And that brings us to this whole treasures hidden among ruins concept. Have you ever thought about that? Sometimes it's actually the tough stuff, the pain, even heartbreak that leads to the most amazing personal growth. It's like those moments when you're feeling super vulnerable, that's when you often discover this inner strength you never even knew you had.
It's like you come out stronger on the other side.
Stronger, more understanding, more compassionate.
So it sounds like it's not about picking sides, right? It's not like we have to choose intellect or love. It's more about,
Finding that balance.
yes,
Yes.
finding that sweet spot, figuring out when to use that logical mind of ours and when to just let our hearts take the lead.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
This has been really eye-opening. Big thanks to you, as always, for sharing your insights. And to everyone listening, think about this. How do you decide when to trust your gut, that feeling in your heart, and when to maybe take a step back and think it through? Something we all grapple with, right?
And there's this rule 5 about silence that really caught my eye. It suggests that silence can be more powerful than words.
It's funny, right? Because we think communication, we think talking.
Right, talking it out.
But love, especially, it's messy. Words can make it more confusing sometimes.
So what does this rule actually say?
It's Rule 5, and it basically says, look, most problems, they come from misunderstandings.
Right.
And when we're talking about love, all those big feelings, words, they kind of fall apart. Shafak saying silence, that's the real language of love.
It's true. How many times have we said, I love you, but like meant 1,000 different things with it?
And how do you explain that? It's beyond words.
Yeah, exactly. Like explaining a dream, you ever try to do that? It loses something in the translation.
Like trying to describe a color to someone who's never seen it, it just falls flat. That's what words do with love.
Yeah.
They oversimplify. Love's got all these layers.
Nuances.
Exactly. Tiny things you can't put a finger on. Silence, though, it leaves space for each person to just feel it.
So instead of forcing our own interpretation on it.
Which is what we do when we talk, sometimes.
Yeah. It's like this empty space where you both bring your own understanding.
And somehow, it clicks. That shared understanding, that's the good stuff. Think about when you really feel connected to someone. It's not always about what you're saying.
It's those moments like a look across a room or when you just burst out laughing and then it goes quiet. And you're just there with each other.
You're just present. No need for words. You're already speaking volumes.
Okay, so this isn't about like becoming a mime, right?
Definitely not.
We're not ditching language altogether.
It's about being choosy with our words, knowing when to speak and when to. Just be.
So how do we get better at that? Being silent the right way, not the awkward silence way.
It's about really listening, not just to the words, but to everything else. A sigh, a touch.
Body language.
All of it. That's communication too. Sometimes the best thing you can say is nothing at all. Just be there. That's powerful.
Wow. Makes you think, if silence is its own language in love, what's your love saying without you saying a word? Something to think about. Pay attention to those quiet moments with your person this week. You might be surprised what you hear.
Well, today we are taking a deep dive, everyone, into Rule 6. This one explores the idea, and just maybe it's true, that the real key to finding love, well, it actually starts with knowing the difference between loneliness and solitude.
Ooh. And that is something I think a lot of people, they mix those two up. I think the source, it says loneliness and solitude are two different things. And it's so true. It sounds kind of simple at first, but man, when you really think about it, there's a lot to unpack there.
For sure. I mean, honestly, how often are we saying, oh, I feel so lonely, when really we're just alone? You're saying that the source we're looking at, they think loneliness is a bad thing.
It is. It can be. Yeah. It's definitely presented as something that can be pretty destructive. And actually, it can really mess with your head when it comes to love. Because when we are truly lonely, it's like we're more likely to, fool ourselves into making bad choices. We're trying to force something to fit instead of waiting for a genuine connection.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm thinking about a time, I don't know, it was a while back, and let's just say I definitely wasn't feeling that whole solitude thing.
Right.
So lonely. And I clung to this relationship. And looking back, it was so wrong. It's like Rule 6 is trying to tell us, hey, get comfortable with yourself first. Then you can actually connect with somebody else.
Yes, absolutely. And the book, it actually takes it a step further with this mirror idea. It says, only in another person's heart can you truly see yourself and the presence of God within you.
Okay, now that's a powerful image, but also kind of confusing. Are they saying that we can only truly see ourselves if it's like romantic love? What about those times when you have this aha moment with a really close friend or even family? Can't those be reflections too?
You're right to pick up on that. The source we're talking about, it does focus a lot on finding the person, so that definitely gives you that romantic vibe. But if we kind of zoom out a little, that Miller idea, yeah, it could apply to all those other relationships you were talking about. The important thing is that feeling of being truly seen and understood. And that can come from different places.
So it's not necessarily about finding one perfect mirror out there, but surrounding ourselves with people who show us different sides of who we are.
Exactly. And that might be the whole solitude thing coming in here. Because you see, if we're always going to other people, looking to them to make us feel good, to show us who we are, will we ever actually be alone with ourselves long enough to figure out who we want to be?
Oh, wow. You're saying that solitude, that good kind of being alone, that is actually really important to do before we even try to find that reflection in somebody else.
It's like the foundation. You got to build the foundation for a healthy relationship. Think about it. If you can't even stand to be alone with your own thoughts and feelings,
Yeah.
are you really expecting somebody else to want to be around them either?
That is a powerful thought. It really makes you think. If solitude is that important, for getting to know ourselves and building good relationships, are we really giving ourselves enough of it? That's something for all of you listening to consider. Think about that as you're on your own journeys, looking for love and connection. Okay, so we're diving deep into, well, one excerpt about gratitude,
Okay.
but there's a twist. It's about being thankful for closed doors.
Interesting.
So what do you make of that?
It really is an interesting take, isn't it?
It is.
What's fascinating about this whole closed door idea, well, it kind of asks us to look for the opportunity because of challenges, not, in spite of them.
Right.
Like, it's easy to be grateful when everything's going our way.
Sure, of course, yeah.
But this excerpt, it kind of flips the script.
How so?
It's suggesting that even when things don't work out how we expect, even when we hit those detours, those closed doors, those are like hidden opportunities.
It's like that saying, right? When one door closes, another one opens.
Exactly.
But I don't know, this excerpt almost seems to be saying that closed door, yeah, that's an opportunity right there.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. It challenges us to see that closed door, not as the end, but as part of a larger plan.
A larger plan, okay.
And that actually resonates a lot with, have you ever looked into Sufi philosophy?
I haven't dived deep into it, no.
They have this beautiful way of looking at life, this idea of accepting and appreciating everything, the good, the bad, the things we think are insignificant, like all of it is part of this like grand tapestry, this journey.
Okay, so that makes sense in terms of like the bigger picture.
Yeah.
But how do we actually put this into practice? How do we, actually feel grateful when we're facing those setbacks?
Right. It's not always easy, is it?
Not at all.
Right.
Like, what about when a dream job falls through? That feels like a pretty solid door slam shut, right?
Oof, yeah. It's tough, for sure. But imagine, what if that closed door is actually a turning point? What if, and I know this is hard to see in the moment, what if that job, that specific opportunity, wasn't actually the right fit for you? This excerpt is like, it's encouraging us to ask, okay, what can I learn from this? This door is closed, fine, but what new path might be opening up because of it?
It's like that closed door is almost like a nudge in a different direction.
Exactly. Instead of dwelling on the disappointment, what if we could see it as this, like, unexpected opportunity?
That is a big shift in thinking, for sure.
It is. But even though it's tough, especially in the moment, like right when that door slams shut, if we can be grateful for it even a little bit, it opens us up to possibilities we might have never, ever considered.
That is definitely something to think about. It's a real perspective shift. So next time you're facing a setback, big or small, think about this conversation.
Yeah.
What feels like a closed door, well, it might just be leading you to something even more amazing. Who knows what's on the other side of that next door, right?
That's a great way to put it. Okay, so ready to dive into something a little different. It's about patience.
Patience.
Yeah, and I know, it sounds kind of, well, boring, right?
Right.
Like waiting for paint to dry, that kind of thing. But stick with me, because what if I told you there's like a really exciting way to think about patience?
Okay, I like exciting.
Exactly. So we're going to unpack this idea of patience, but not the just sit there and wait kind of patience. We're talking about active patience, the kind that actually helps you grow and like really live a more fulfilling life. Patience does not mean to passively endure. It means to be farsighted enough to trust the end result of a process. So basically it's saying that patience isn't about just waiting around for something to happen. It's about understanding that there's like this whole process unfolding and trusting that it's going to lead you somewhere good, even if you can't see it yet.
That's a really different way to think about patience. It's not passive at all, is it? It's about being, like you said, farsighted, having that trust.
Exactly. And you know what else really struck me about this rule? It's the imagery it uses. It says, what does patience mean? It means to look at the thorn and see the rose, to look at the night and see the dawn.
Wow.
Right? It's like in that moment, you're not just focused on the thorn, the pain, the difficulty. You're choosing to see the potential, the beauty that's going to come from it. Have you ever experienced that in your own life, like being able to see that potential even when things are tough?
Oh, absolutely. I think we all have those moments where, you're going through something challenging. It could be a personal struggle, or maybe it's like a creative block at work, something like that. But instead of getting completely overwhelmed by the difficulty of it, you take a step back and you can just kind of sense that there's something better waiting on the other side. You just have to trust the process, keep going, and eventually you'll see that dawn.
Yes, exactly. And the book actually talks about that too, about how impatience can actually stop us from seeing the good stuff.
Oh, how so?
Well, there's this other line that says, impatience means to be so short-sighted as to not be able to see the outcome. It's like we're so busy focusing on wanting things to happen right now that we miss out on the journey. And sometimes the journey, even with all its bumps, is where the real growth happens.
Yeah, that's so true. We're living in a world that's all about instant gratification, right? Like we want everything fast, fast, fast. But some things, the best things even, they don't work that way. They take time.
Totally. Think about like building a meaningful relationship. That doesn't happen overnight, right?
Right.
It takes time, effort, patience, lots of patience. Or creating something amazing like a work of art or a piece of music. Those things take time to develop. You can't rush the process.
It's so true. And, speaking of processes, there's this really beautiful analogy in Rule 8. It says, the lovers of God never run out of patience, for they know that time is needed for the crescent moon to become full.
I love that. It's like just as the moon goes through its phases, everything in life has its own natural rhythm. There are times for growth, times for rest, times for, well, just being patient.
Exactly. And when we can tap into that understanding, when we can trust that there's this larger order to things, it makes it a little easier to be patient, what I can
Ah,
say.
absolutely. So to wrap things up, it seems like the key takeaway here is that real patience isn't about passive waiting. It's about trusting the process. It's about looking at the thorns and seeing the rose, knowing that the crescent moon will eventually become full.
Beautifully put.
So I want to leave you with this, listener. Where in your own life could a little bit of active patience make a big difference? What thorns are you facing right now that might just lead you to something incredible if you can just trust the process? Think about it.
So, all right, I'm intrigued, but how do we actually, what does that mean? How do we make a trip a journey within?
Yeah, that's the real question, right? It's about mindful travel.
Okay.
Not just, seeing the sights and taking pictures, but really using the whole experience to look inward,
Okay.
to understand ourselves a little bit better. Think about it, like when you're outside of your element, when everything around you is unfamiliar, that's when you really have this space to see yourself more clearly.
That's so true.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I'm with you, but what does that look like, practically speaking? I mean, journey within, that sounds very nice when you're on top of a mountain or something. But what about when I'm in the middle of Marrakech, in the market, and I'm trying to haggle for some spices that I can't even pronounce? What's the journey within then?
I love it. You've hit on something really important there, which is discomfort.
Oh, yeah, there's plenty of that when you travel.
Exactly. Because even if it's just in a small way, leaving that comfort zone can be so revealing.
Right.
You might discover, I don't know, you're way more patient than you thought,
Yeah, yeah.
or more adaptable.
That's true.
And that, my friend, is growth.
That's true. No, I remember this one time I was in the Medina in Fez, and I got so turned around. I mean, my phone died, I had no map, and let's just say my Arabic was not helpful.
I know.
And I don't know, I just remember having this moment where I was like, I'm going to figure this out. And I did, and I found my way back, and I felt this weird sense of confidence after that. It was if I can handle this, I can handle anything.
Exactly.
It was weird.
And sometimes, it's not even about having these big epiphanies, right?
Right.
Sometimes the journey within is just about finding those little moments of stillness in the middle of all the chaos.
Yeah.
Maybe you take 5 minutes to jot down your thoughts in a journal or something, or just sit with your feelings as you process everything you're seeing and experiencing.
It's true. There is something about being in a different place that just makes you process things differently. I don't know, I feel like my mind is more open to new perspectives when I'm not in my, usual routine.
Yeah.
But it's not all about introspection either, right? Part of self-discovery is also about how we interact with the world around us.
100%. I mean, think about encountering different cultures,
Yeah.
customs that might seem strange at first,
Yeah.
maybe even a little uncomfortable. But if we can approach those moments with curiosity instead of judgment, wow, the things that we can learn.
That's so true.
It challenges our assumptions.
Yeah.
It helps us see the world and ourselves in a whole new light.
And you know what I love about this is it's you don't have to, hop on a plane to have that experience.
Right.
This is something that we can tap into every day just by being a little more intentional, a little more curious about where we are and what's around us.
Precisely. Like even a staycation,
Yeah.
just staying home. But if you approach it with the right mindset It can be just as transformative as any trip abroad.
It's true. So I guess the question is, if every interaction, every experience is an opportunity for self-discovery, then it makes life a pretty exciting journey, huh?
It really does. So tell me, if you could journey anywhere in the world, knowing that the real exploration is happening within, where would you go and what would you hope to discover about yourself along the way?
Ooh, that's a good one. I think I'd go to...
All right, so this rule, Rule 10, it says, and I quote, "The midwife knows that when there is no pain, the way for the baby cannot be opened and the mother cannot give birth. Likewise, for a new self to be born, hardship is necessary." Whoa, intense comparison, right?
A little bit,
Well,
yeah. But it's a metaphor that keeps popping up across history. This idea that we need to go through fire to come out stronger. It's not some new age thing, you know? It's an ancient philosophy, myths, even modern psychology. It's everywhere.
now that you mention it, it does sound kind of like those hero stories, all those trials and tribulations they go through. But what does this new self even mean? Are we talking like a whole new personality?
That's where it gets interesting, right? It's not about a total transformation. Think of it more like unlocking a new level of yourself. That new self is still you, but with more, I don't know, resilience, wisdom,
Hmm,
empathy, whatever qualities that hardship kind of like forced you to develop. It's like the you that's been forged in fire, you know?
I can dig it. But going back to the childbirth thing, and not that I've ever given birth,
Hmm.
but that pain's got to be off the charts, right? Are we really saying we need that level of intensity to grow?
Good question, because there is a difference between hardship and just pointless suffering. The rule isn't about searching for pain or even like glorifying it. It's more about understanding that challenges, sometimes painful ones, are just part of life. They can't be avoided. And here's the kicker. They can be huge opportunities to transform.
So it's not really about the pain itself, but what we do with it, like what we learn from those tough experiences.
100%. And I know it sounds a little dramatic, but Nietzsche said, that which does not kill us makes us stronger. And as dramatic as that sounds, there's actually research on resilience to back it up. People who face and overcome really difficult stuff often develop, well, a lot of things. A deeper sense of self-reliance, stronger coping mechanisms, and some even say a greater appreciation for life. It's like, what doesn't break you?
Makes you stronger.
Oh.
See, I paid attention back in philosophy class. But that reminds me of when I was learning guitar. Talk about hardship. My fingers were on fire. I wanted to quit a million times. But I pushed through those frustrating practices. And let me tell you, when I finally played that first song all the way through, pure joy.
See? And that's a perfect example. Think about what came out of all that struggle. And I'm not even talking about the fact that you can play guitar now, but the perseverance, the discipline, all of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And okay, maybe a few calluses. But anyway, so flipping it around, what happens when we don't go through those hard times? Like, what if we could dodge all the challenges? What then?
It's tempting to think a life without problems is the dream, right? But here's the thing. When we try to avoid the hard stuff, we might actually be setting ourselves up for a bigger fall later. Think of it like a tree that's always been protected from the wind. It might grow tall, but it's weak. And the first storm that comes along, it's gonna break.
Oh, that's a good one. That really paints a picture. It makes you wonder, though, how do we try to shield ourselves from hardship without even realizing it?
That's the thing about it. Sometimes we don't even know we're doing it. It could be anything from staying in our comfort zones to avoiding tough conversations to surrounding ourselves with people who just agree with everything we say. And look, those things might feel good in the moment, right? But ultimately, they keep us from developing that resilience and strength we need for when those challenges inevitably come.
This has been a total eye-opener for me, I got to say. But now I want to hear from you. Yeah, you, the one listening. What's one thing in your life right now that's hard? Big or small, it doesn't matter. Think about it through the lens of this whole Rule 10 thing. Could this be a chance for your own new self to kind of break free?
It's not about wishing the tough times away, right? It's about seeing what they can offer us. Maybe it's a chance to tap into a strength you didn't even know you had. Or maybe, just maybe, that hardship is guiding you towards a more real, more powerful version of yourself.
And on that note, my friends, that's something worth thinking about. So the next time things get rough, remember what we talked about. Yeah, remember Rule 10.
Yeah.
It might just change your whole perspective.
Rule 11. It's about, well, hold on. I've got it right here. The quest for love changes us. There is no seeker among those who search for love who has not matured on the way.
Whoa. Okay, yeah, that's deep.
Right. And it got us thinking, like, what if seeking love isn't just about, finding the one?
It's funny, right? We often think of finding love as this like external thing, like finding the missing piece of a puzzle.
Yes, but this rule, it's saying, no, the search itself, that's the thing that changes you.
Exactly. It's like, think about it. When you're looking for love, you're probably thinking about, what am I putting out there? What do I even want?
Oh, totally. Like suddenly you're confronting maybe your own flaws or maybe even like what you actually want in another person.
Right. And maybe you start working on those flaws, or you become more clear about your own needs. It's like a process of self-discovery that runs parallel to looking for someone else.
So instead of like desperately searching for someone to complete you.
You're actually becoming a more complete person on your own.
Yeah. Okay, that's a much healthier way to approach dating, don't you think?
Totally. It takes the pressure off needing to find the one right this second,
Yeah.
And instead it's like, hey, I'm using this time to learn and grow.
And maybe, just maybe, that makes you even more attractive to someone.
Right. Because confidence and self-awareness, those are attractive qualities.
So basically, Shafak is saying focus on yourself, understand yourself, and love might just follow. Who knew?
And hey, even if it doesn't happen right away, at least you're on a path of personal growth, right?
Totally.
We're looking at Rule 12 from the book 40 Rules of Love.
Okay.
And this rule, it's kind of a wild one, claims there are more fake gurus than stars in a visible universe.
Wow.
So buckle up, Ray, because we're going to unpack what that actually means, how to spot those, like fake gurus.
Yeah, how do we tell?
Exactly.
That's a striking image, isn't it? More fake gurus than stars.
I mean, it makes you think about, that deep human need for guidance that we all have.
It really does.
Throughout history, people have always been drawn to these kind of charismatic figures, right? Looking for answers, looking for leadership, for wisdom.
But like this rule points out, not everyone who claims to have those answers actually does.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
And it's not just some abstract thing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure we've all had experiences with people who, like, promised us the moon and the stars and, well,
Didn't deliver.
yeah. And maybe it was a boss, a coach, even someone, you thought was a friend.
Absolutely. I've been there.
Right.
Yeah.
So how do we navigate this whole guru landscape? How do we separate those true mentors from, the ones just trying to, like, build their brand?
Right.
Well, Rule 12, thankfully, offers some pretty insightful clues.
Okay.
So let's dig in.
Let's do it. One of the things that this rule emphasizes is that true mentors, genuine mentors, they don't crave the spotlight. They're not going to demand constant attention or expect you to like hang on their every word.
I know, that's good to know.
Yeah, they're much more focused on helping you value your own inner wisdom, your own intuition.
See, that's interesting because it's not about them and their ego. It's about, like you said, drawing out your potential.
Exactly. This rule describes genuine mentors as being, and this is a quote, transparent as glass. Letting their own ego kind of fade away so that something bigger can shine through.
Oh, I like that.
Right. It's
Yeah.
like they're not trying to build a cult of personality.
Yeah.
They're more like a conduit helping you connect with your own inner compass.
Okay, so let's get practical. How do we spot these genuine mentors out in the wild? What are the, like, red flags we should be looking for?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I think a big one is to really pay attention to their motivation. Yeah. Are they genuinely invested in your growth, in your development as a person?
Okay.
Or are they more interested in, like, building their own platform, their own influence?
Oh, yeah.
That's a big tell. True mentors, they're always looking to empower you to think for yourself, not to become dependent on them.
Right. It's that old saying, right?
What's that?
Give a man a fish and you feed him for a day.
Right.
Teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime.
There you go.
A true mentor is going to teach you how to fish.
Absolutely. They're going to give you those tools, that confidence to navigate your own path, make your own choices. So I'd say if someone's constantly putting themselves at the center, demanding obedience, making you feel inadequate, those are some really big red flags.
Yeah, those are huge.
Yeah.
Wow, this has been, like, eye-opening. It's a good reminder that true mentorship, it's about empowerment, not dependence.
Exactly. And it leaves us with a really powerful question, I think.
Okay, what's that?
If true mentors don't actually seek out the spotlight,
Right.
where might you find them? Who are the quiet guides in your life? The ones offering support, wisdom, without needing any fanfare. I think that's something worth thinking about.
It really is.
Yeah.
It really is.
We're looking at Rule 13 from this book, The 40 Rules of Love.
Okay.
And honestly, the title threw me off a bit at first. I thought it was going to be all lovey-dovey.
Right.
But this rule, let me tell you, it's less about romance, more about just rolling with the punches, Life as it happens.
Interesting.
And the imagery it uses is kind of wild. It says, try not to resist the changes that come your way. Instead, let life live through you. And don't worry that your life is turning upside down. How do you know that the side you are used to is better than the one to come?
Wow. It's interesting that it doesn't just say, like, change is a part of life, right?
Right.
Which we hear all the time. It uses this idea of letting life live through you. Like we're meant to experience things, not, I don't know, control them.
Yeah, it's like, have you ever been on a roller coaster?
Sure.
You're strapped in, there's no going back.
Right.
You can either scream and fight it, or just throw your hands up and embrace the ride, right?
Oh, it's so true. And that idea of just surrendering,
Yeah.
it can be powerful,
Yeah.
but people misunderstand it. It doesn't mean you become passive. It's more like accepting what is.
Yeah.
Instead of using all your energy fighting what you can't change.
Okay, so no more doormat. Got it.
Right.
But how does that actually work? Let's say you're thinking about a career change.
Okay.
It's scary.
Yeah.
But this rule is basically saying, how do you know it won't be amazing?
They're like, we're wired to focus on what could go wrong right
Yeah.
instead of what might go right. This rule, I think, it's reminding us the unknown can be a good thing, full of opportunity, even if it's uncomfortable at first.
That's what gets me every time it takes a real leap of faith to trust that the other side of change might actually be better.
It does. It's definitely something you have to practice.
Yeah.
So I want you to think about something. What's one change you're resisting right now?
Right.
And what would it look like to approach it with curiosity, with openness, instead of fear? Something to think about.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Food for thought.
Definitely.
Okay, so picture this. Each of us were like these unfinished artworks.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Unfinished how?
Still being shaped, guided, molded, all by this force the book calls, well, God.
Interesting. And I'm guessing this force is where things get a little,
A little out there for some, yeah. But stick with me.
I'm here for it. I think a lot of our listeners can relate to that feeling of something bigger, even if the word God doesn't quite fit.
Exactly. Call it a universal energy, higher power, even just nature doing its thing.
Right, right. The point is, there's something bigger than just us shaping who we are.
Love that. So how's this divine artist, as the book says, actually work?
Well, think of it this way. The rule talks about God dealing with each of us separately, like an artist, right? Taking their time, focusing on every little detail.
Like we're all these masterpieces in progress.
Exactly. Your journey, my journey, they're all unique. No mass production here.
Which kind of throws that whole idea of perfection out the window, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. If we're always evolving, always becoming, maybe perfection isn't the destination at all.
More like the journey itself.
Exactly. It's almost liberating, isn't it? Those flaws, mistakes, those aren't failures.
But what are they then?
They're brushstrokes, adding depth, texture, making our lives these amazing one-of-a-kind pieces.
So freeing. Okay, but here's another thought. If we're all these individual works of art, is there a bigger picture?
Ooh, you're getting it. That's where things get really interesting. The rule talks about how each person is equally important for the entire picture.
Like we're all connected.
Think of it like a mosaic. Every piece, every color, even the tiniest tile matters.
We're each a brushstroke, a dot, adding to something much, much bigger.
Exactly. It's the collective artwork of humanity. And that's huge.
So wait, does that mean our individual choices, our actions, they all have a ripple effect?
Absolutely. It makes you think twice about the kind of mark you're leaving on the world, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's not just about our own journey anymore.
Right. It's like, what colors are you bringing? What's your contribution to the whole?
Whoa. Okay, I need a minute to process this. We're unfinished works of art, guided by something bigger, and all part of this massive, interconnected human tapestry.
A lot to take in, right? It's a whole new way of seeing ourselves and our place in the world.
It really is. And maybe that's the beauty of it, yeah. The mystery, the becoming, and knowing we're all in this together.
Beautifully said.
It makes you wonder, though, if our lives are the canvas, what kind of story are you painting with yours? Something to think about, isn't it?
Absolutely.
I know I will be. So I'm just going to read this rule straight from the book because it's pretty powerful. It says, it's easy to love a perfect God, period. What is far more difficult is to love fellow human beings with all their imperfections and defects.
Yeah, Yeah, it's true.
And it keeps going, one can only know what one is capable of loving.
Whoa.
Yeah. So much to unpack there. Where do we even start? What like hits you first when you hear that?
I think it's that immediate contrast, that juxtaposition.
Okay.
Loving perfection.
Okay.
It's easy
Right.
because it's perfect.
Mm.
It's like looking at a beautiful sunset. It's like listening to a perfect piece of music.
Yeah.
There's nothing to forgive. There's nothing to work on. It just is. But loving flawed humans, ourselves included,
Yeah.
that requires something else from us, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It takes effort.
Vulnerability.
Right. Vulnerability. Like we all have that friend, we were talking about this earlier, that friend who's, always late.
Maybe a little flaky.
Yeah, a little flaky, but they also make you laugh until you cry. And, loving them means seeing past those little quirks, meeting them where they are.
Which takes patience.
Oh, so much patience.
Effort, willingness to see the good.
Yeah.
And that's where I think the wisdom comes in.
Oh,
I think
yeah.
because it's in those like real messy human moments when we choose to love in spite of those flaws that we actually learn something. Not just about that other person, but about ourselves, about what we're capable of.
I totally agree. And, I was thinking about a time, this really exemplifies this, when I messed up really badly with a close friend.
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah, it was bad, royally screwed up. And I felt so terrible, so ashamed, and I almost like backed away from the friendship completely because in that moment I felt so flawed, so unworthy.
Yeah.
But and this is like, she's amazing in her infinite wisdom. I mean, she had every right to walk away.
Yeah.
She didn't. She actually grew closer. And she didn't let me off the hook, don't get me wrong. But she didn't abandon me in my mess. And we worked through it. And going through that with her, I learned so much about forgiveness, about real love, not the Hallmark movie version.
Right, right. And see, that's what I find so fascinating about this rule, because it links those experiences, those very human, very personal experiences, to this idea of the divine.
Okay, so you're saying that those moments, like loving the friend who drives us crazy, the coworker who, knows exactly how to push our buttons.
Your mother-in-law.
Oh, especially mother-in-law. Those are all like opportunities to know God.
In a way, yes.
That's kind of a radical idea.
It is radical, but think about it. If we agree that love, at its core, is about acceptance, it's about forgiveness, understanding, then maybe, just maybe, by working on those things in our daily lives, we are reflecting something bigger than ourselves.
Wow. Okay. So how do we take all this big idea and make it make sense for, for our listeners, for people who are like out there dealing with real relationships, trying to figure this whole love thing out?
I think the takeaway is this. Embrace the mess.
Yeah.
Don't shy away from it. Because it is in those imperfections, in the struggle to understand and be understood, that we often discover the most profound truths about, well, everything. About ourselves, about love, and yeah, maybe even about God.
And maybe, just maybe, by loving those imperfect souls around us, we open ourselves up to experiencing a love that's even bigger, even deeper than we could have imagined.
So if loving imperfect beings is a pathway to knowing God, what does that say about the nature of God's love for us? Something to ponder.
That's going to keep me thinking all week. Rule 16 from this book, 40 Rules of Love, and let me tell you, this ain't your mama's relationship advice.
All right, you got my attention. What's this rule all about?
So it's about this idea of inward purity. Like, have you ever felt like you're checking all the boxes, looking good on the outside, but something still feels kind of off inside,
Oh, totally. Like something's misaligned, but you can't quite put your finger on it.
Exactly. That's the distinction this rule dives into, outward actions versus, like, true inner state. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's kind of like what we were just talking about, right? The text calls it being spotless on the outside, but carrying these like invisible stains. And it gives hatred and bigotry as examples, which is kind of heavy, but it makes you think.
Right, because it's not just about what you do, it's about how those feelings like take root inside you.
Yeah, and they end up coloring how you see the world, how you treat other people, even yourself.
It's so true. We can get so caught up in appearances, achievements, social media, all that it's easy to forget about the inner landscape.
It's like having a perfectly organized junk drawer, but your like metaphorical basement is a disaster zone.
Exactly. But okay, so then how do we even begin to clean up that inner mess?
That's where it gets interesting. The rule points to love as the kind of the antidote.
Love, that's kind of vague, isn't it?
It does sound kind of abstract at first, but think about it. If hatred and bigotry are the stains, then acts of love, compassion, even forgiveness. Those are the things that, like, wash those stains away.
So it's about realizing that real change, real cleanliness has to start on the inside, right?
Exactly. It's an inside job.
And speaking of inner work, the text also mentions these practices, abstinence and fasting, as methods of purification.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
Right. And I don't know about you, but when I hear those words, I kind of think about, like, extreme diets. Haha.
Right. It's easy to get stuck on the literal meaning. But these practices have been around forever in so many cultures as ways to kind of shift your focus inward.
So it's not really about deprivation then, right? It's more about making space for something else.
Exactly. Like creating space for self-reflection, for confronting what's going on inside. Even in our world, taking a break from social media, disconnecting from all the noise. That's a form of abstinence.
Wow. Yeah. When you put it that way, it's like we practice abstinence without even realizing it.
Right. All the time.
But what about those, like, everyday stains, like those little
Hmm.
bits of negativity we don't even notice we're carrying around?
Oh, those are the sneakiest kind. The judgments we make, holding on to anger, letting those negative thoughts run wild. That's how those metaphorical stains fester.
And I'm guessing that's where the love is cleanser idea comes back in.
Exactly. If we can approach those situations with more compassion for ourselves and others, that's when real change happens.
Love in action, huh?
Exactly. Not just the grand gestures, but in all the small everyday moments. That's how we cleanse ourselves from the inside out.
Lots to think about. If love is the ultimate purifier, how do we actually cultivate more of it in our lives? Not just for others, but for ourselves, too. That's something we could all stand to ponder, don't you think?
Fascinating idea from Elif Shafak's The 40 Rules of Love, specifically Rule 17, which says we each contain the entire universe within us.
Bold statement.
Right. And before anyone says it, yes, even the not-so-great parts. So buckle up.
I'm intrigued already. And I have to say, this isn't just a fictional idea. This idea resonates across philosophies and spiritual traditions for centuries.
Which is why it's perfect for a deep dive. Honestly, when I first read this rule, my mind was blown. But also, a lot of questions.
Such as?
Like, what does that even mean practically?
Yeah.
To have the whole universe inside us.
Okay, fair. Let's break it down. Starting perhaps with the rule's mention of shaitan, which,
Often gets translated as the devil.
right, which I can see might cause some, shall we say, concern.
Do you think? Like, should I be worried? Do I need an exorcist for this deep dive?
Laughs. Thankfully, no. Shaitan, in this context, is better understood as a metaphor for our shadow self, you could say.
Shadow self.
Those aspects of ourselves we consider, well, bad, unacceptable, things we'd rather hide, even from ourselves.
Okay, starting to make more sense. So not literal devils, but more like
Yeah.
our own personal junk drawers.
Yeah.
Full of insecurities and all that.
Exactly. And here's where it gets really interesting. Rule 17 implies that acknowledging these shadow aspects, instead of feeling them, is actually key to self-awareness and to understanding the universe around us.
Hold on, I got to process that. So you're saying by understanding our own personal compost heap, we somehow understand the universe better.
It's about the concept of microcosm and macrocosm. The idea that we humans are smaller reflections of the vast universe, and the universe is reflected in us.
Whoa.
Think about it. The universe has immense beauty, but also destructive forces. Supernovas, black holes.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
And within us, we have the capacity for great love, compassion, but also for harm, anger, jealousy, things we don't always like to admit.
Heavy stuff. But it makes you think, if we can understand those destructive parts within ourselves, maybe navigating the world out there makes more sense.
Exactly.
Still, to truly know yourself, she, Ann, and all, that feels daunting. Like, where do I even start?
It's a journey, not a destination. Begin simply. Pay attention to your thoughts, your emotions, without judgment.
Sounds easy enough.
Notice how often you criticize yourself, compare yourself to others. That awareness, that's the first step.
So more flashlight, less broom. Shine a light on the messy parts instead of sweeping them under the rug.
Precisely. And this idea, it pops up everywhere. Sufism, for example, sees self-knowledge as a path to knowing the divine.
So understanding ourselves, even the she-Dan parts, could lead to a deeper understanding of, well, everything.
Which brings us to a final thought. If we accept this idea that the entire universe could reside within us, imagine the potential.
Mind blown. Again,
Embrace the light and the shadow within and see where that journey takes you.
that's a deep dive if I've ever heard one.
So we're taking a cue from 40 Rules of Love, this book that's like a treasure trove of insights, and this one rule, Rule 18, really stopped me in my tracks. Get this. If you want to change the way others treat you, you should first change the way you treat yourself. Unless you learn to love yourself fully and sincerely, there is no way you can be loved. Once you achieve that stage, however, be thankful for every thorn that others might throw at you. It is a sign that you will soon be showered in roses.
Whoa. It's a mouthful, but it's so profound when you really break it down.
Right, like at first glance, it's almost paradoxical. Love yourself and then be thankful for the thorns. What do you make of that?
Okay, so let's unpack this. First off, the whole love yourself first concept. It's everywhere these days, right? But it's more than just a catchy phrase. There's real psychological weight behind it. Think about it. If you're constantly running on empty, eating yourself up, neglecting your own needs, how can you possibly show up authentically and lovingly for anyone else?
Right, you can't pour from an empty cup.
Exactly. Self-love is the foundation. It's not selfish, it's essential. And that's where the science comes in. Our self-perception isn't just some internal thing, it radiates outward. It literally affects how others perceive and treat us.
Okay, give us the science lowdown here. How does that actually work?
Well, there's this fascinating study where researchers found that even simple things like confident body language, standing tall, making eye contact, can actually lead to more positive social interactions. People respond to that energy,
Interesting. So if you project confidence, even if you don't totally feel it yet, people are more likely to treat you with respect.
Exactly. It's like you're subtly shifting the entire dynamic of the interaction just by how you carry yourself. It's like that quote, "We accept the love we think we deserve." If we secretly believe we're not worthy of love and respect, we'll unconsciously act in ways that confirm that belief.
It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Exactly. But here's the cool part. When we do cultivate that self-love, when we start treating ourselves with kindness and respect, something really interesting happens. Those thorns, those inevitable negative comments or experiences we all face, they don't sting as much anymore.
It's like we grow this inner armor.
Yes. And not only that, but we're also more open to the roses, the genuine love, the appreciation, because we're not coming from a place of neediness. We can recognize the real deal when we see it.
So powerful. Okay, I'm curious, what's an example of how this plays out in real life? Can you give us a concrete scenario?
Sure. Think of someone who's gone through a major personal transformation. Maybe they finally left that toxic job, prioritized their health, or started setting boundaries in their relationships. You often see this ripple effect where their relationships improve too.
Yeah, totally. It's like they raise their own standards and suddenly their relationships have to rise to meet them.
Exactly. And they attract people who are more aligned with this new, empowered version of themselves.
It's like they're finally living in their true authenticity.
Exactly. It's inspiring, really.
It is. Now, for our listeners who are nodding along thinking, okay, I'm sold, but how do I actually do this? Where do I start? What's one tangible step they can take, like today, to start cultivating more self-love?
It really can be as simple as paying attention to that inner voice. How are you talking to yourself? Are you being kind, compassionate, or are you your own worst critic? Just notice. And then next time you catch yourself being overly self-critical, try replacing that negative thought with something, anything you genuinely appreciate about yourself. Your sense of humor, your kindness, your awesome taste in podcasts.
See, you get me, and I love that. Just start small, one thought, one act of self-kindness at a time. And you know what? It makes you wonder, if we shift our perspective to see those thorns as opportunities for growth, could we actually attract more roses into our lives? Could our perspective be that powerful?
That's the real question, isn't it? So we thought we'd dive into this idea with 40 rules of love, specifically Rule 19.
Yeah, Rule 19 really stood out. It's all about tackling life's journey in those first steps.
And sometimes the simplest ideas can be the most profound.
Totally agree.
So Rule 19 says, fret not where the road will take you. Instead, concentrate on the first step. It sounds so simple, but how often do we actually do that?
Right. We get so bogged down by the what-ifs that we never even take that first step.
Which is kind of ironic because it's the one part of the journey we actually have the most control over.
That's so true. Like, we're not responsible for the entire path, just that initial action.
Okay, so less overthinking, more doing. I like it. But then Rule 19 takes it a step further. It goes on to say, once you take that step, let everything do what it naturally does and the rest will follow. That almost sounds like a leap of faith, doesn't it?
It does. It's about trusting the process, trusting yourself. It reminds me of this one time I was stuck on starting a new project. I mean, completely paralyzed by all the details.
I've been there.
What did you do? I actually remembered Rule 19 and just dove headfirst into outlining the first chapter. Didn't even think about the rest of it. It just flowed. The words just poured out. And that's when I really understood that whole do not go with the flow, be the flow.
Wow. Powerful stuff.
It is. Taking that first step, even if it's small, makes you an active participant in your own life. You're shaping your direction, not just letting things happen to you.
I love that. So it's like this rule is a recipe for overcoming procrastination and fear, really. For anyone listening who feels stuck, what would you say is the biggest takeaway?
Action creates momentum. Don't get lost in the what ifs. Trust yourself. Focus on that first step, stay present, and just see what unfolds. It's amazing what possibilities open up when you do that.
It really is. So as you continue on your journey, think about that one goal you've been putting off. What's one small step, one action you can take today to be the flow? You got this.
And so we're doing a deep dive on this book, 40 Rules of Love. And
Okay.
Rule 20, it really stopped me in my tracks. So we're talking about Rule 20 today. And it basically says, each of us, right? We're all these unique creations by, some force, some higher power, whatever you believe in.
Yeah, it's like we're all
But it's like
uniquely designed.
we're all these totally unique designs.
Yeah, and I think that's something that sometimes gets lost,
Totally.
especially in today's world where there's so much pressure to fit in and be like everyone else. This rule is kind of like this breath of fresh air to say no, your differences are what make you special.
And not even just tolerate other people's differences, revere them.
Yeah.
Those differences they're sacred. That's what this book is saying.
Absolutely. There's even there's a philosophical term for this, and it's called pluralism.
Okay.
And it's this idea that diversity isn't just a fact of life, but it's something that's actually really good.
Right.
And that we should be celebrating it. We should be embracing it.
Totally, totally. And it makes you think about how often do we try to cram people into these boxes?
Yeah, all the time.
This is how you should be, this is what you should think. And this rule is saying that's
It's disrespect. That's disrespect to the art. If you think about it, we're all pieces of art, and when you try to make someone else, conform to what you think they should be, it's like taking a hammer to a mosaic.
It's like you're it's like you're messing with the artist's vision.
Exactly. And the book even says it beautifully. It says, imposing your thoughts on others is like disrespecting God's holy scheme.
Oh.
Whoa, right. So regardless of your beliefs, it's this powerful image of there's this beautiful tapestry, and who are we to change it?
It's true. It's we're all part of this this big
beautiful mess.
Yeah, this beautiful mess, right?
And it's in those differences, that's where the beauty lies.
Right. And even thinking about this in terms of, how we approach any relationship, not even just romantic relationships, but any relationship.
Yeah, absolutely.
It all starts with respect.
Yes.
But respect for those differences.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, think about it. Think about a time where you were talking to someone.
Yeah.
And they had a totally different perspective on something.
Totally.
And it just kind of shifted your thinking a little bit.
Yeah, those moments where you're I've never thought of it that way.
Yeah, and you're like, oh wow, and you learn something.
Exactly. It's those are little gifts.
It is a gift.
Those differences are little gifts.
Right, because it's if we were all the same,
it'd be so boring.
It would be so boring.
Oh my gosh.
Can you imagine?
It's so boring.
The world would be
like a beige wall everywhere you look.
It would be like a beige wall. And it's it all comes back to like we were saying, if you believe in something bigger than yourself, that created this this tapestry.
Your beautiful tapestry of light.
It's almost like you have to celebrate the differences.
You have to. It's not even just about being polite.
Right.
It's about reverence.
Yeah.
It's a reverence for life, for creation, for something bigger than ourselves.
It's a whole new way of looking at it.
It is, and it makes you want to go out and find those differences and learn from them.
Right. Search them out.
Yeah, because there's so much we can learn from people who are different from us.
Because everyone has something to offer.
Exactly.
Everyone has that their
unique perspective, their unique experiences.
Right. And it's it makes you think about, okay, so how can I How can I look for those differences and appreciate them?
Yes. And how can we like let that kind of like how can we weave that into our everyday lives?
Yeah. Yes.
You know?
Well, it's like a challenge,
It is a challenge.
but it's an exciting challenge.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Like, I don't know, it kind of like, it gives me chills.
It's inspiring.
It does.
Yeah.
It's inspiring.
Now, before we jump into Rule 10, let's touch on Sufism briefly. Just for context, it's a mystical path within Islam, right?
Exactly. It emphasizes a direct and personal experience of the divine, more about connecting with that inner truth than, outward rituals.
So less about the where, more about what's within.
Exactly.
And that leads perfectly into Rule 10. It basically says it's not the place, but the person that matters.
Interesting.
Yeah. And it even gives this example of a tavern. It says, when a true lover of God goes into a tavern, the tavern becomes his chamber of prayer. It's pretty powerful imagery, don't you think?
It is, because it's not about the physical space, right? It's about what you bring to it, your internal state, your connection with the divine. It transcends the environment.
So someone who's focused on negativity would likely find it, well, anywhere, really.
Exactly.
And this rule, it doesn't stop there. It talks about this, well, it uses this imagery of a Sufi third eye. Like you can see beyond the surface and into a person's inner self.
It's a powerful metaphor, isn't it? The third eye. It's about cultivating a deeper understanding, seeing beyond our preconceived notions and judgments.
So it's not about taking it literally.
Right. It's not about suddenly having X-ray vision. It's about cultivating compassion and understanding, seeing the divine spark in everyone, regardless of their flaws or our assumptions.
That's a great point. It's so easy to get caught up in those assumptions. We make snap judgments based on appearance, what we've heard, or even just our own biases.
Absolutely. And that's where the real work begins. It's about recognizing those judgments as they arise and challenging them.
So how do we actually, put this into practice? How do we start seeing with this third eye in our everyday lives?
Well, awareness is key. Pay attention to your initial reactions to people. What judgments are you making? And then ask yourself, are these judgments based on reality, or are they coming from my own internal filters?
Like those biases we were just talking about.
Exactly. And once you start recognizing those filters, you can start to see past them. You start to see the person, the human being, behind the labels and assumptions.
It's about remembering that we're all on this journey together.
Exactly. We all experience joy, pain, love, loss. We all have our own struggles.
So true. So the next time you're interacting with someone, try to approach them with that same compassion and understanding. Look for that divine spark within them.
You might be surprised by what you discover. And who knows, you might even start to see the world and yourself in a whole new light.
It's about changing your perspective from the inside out. Well, it got me thinking about this Sufi idea, actually.
Right.
It's Rule 22 from the 40 Rules of Love.
Okay.
And it talks about this life being like a temporary loan.
I like that.
Yeah, it really struck a chord with me. And it made me wonder if maybe I'm not appreciating this loan as much as I could be, by getting so caught up in these fleeting things.
That's a powerful metaphor, definitely. And the source goes even deeper, describing the world as this, sketchy imitation compared to some greater reality.
Okay, so life is a temporary loan and a world that's a sketchy imitation. What's that even mean, practically speaking?
So picture this. Someone hands you something precious, right? Something you absolutely cherish. But there's a catch: you can't keep it. It's borrowed. It's a loaner. That's how this rule wants us to see life.
Okay, I'm with you.
But here's the thing. We get so bogged down in the day-to-day, we forget we're even holding something precious. Think about work deadlines.
Oh, tell me about it.
Right. Are those deadlines really the real thing? Or are they just a sketchy imitation of something way more important? Time with family, passions, even just enjoying the moment.
So we're mistaking the map for the territory.
Yeah.
Right? Like lost in the details, missing the bigger picture.
Exactly. The source even compares us to kids who don't know the difference between a toy and something genuinely meaningful. And it goes on to warn us about extremes.
Because those extremes keep us from truly appreciating this loan we've been given. And, we see it everywhere, right? People turning into workaholics.
Oh, absolutely.
Endlessly scrolling through bad news.
Yeah.
Or clinging to every fleeting trend like it's the answer to everything.
Exactly. And those extremes, they come with consequences. Imagine constantly living in fight or flight mode because of some impossible deadline.
Oh, been there. My nervous system feels that.
Right. That's one extreme. Then there's the opposite end. Chasing fleeting pleasure, constantly needing that next dopamine hit, leaves you feeling empty. you know?
Unsatisfied. Yeah, for sure. So how does the Sufi approach handle all this? It's about moderation, right?
Yeah, but it's not about suppressing your emotions or never committing to anything. The source stresses Sufis do not go to extremes.
Okay.
It's about this mild and moderate way of living, finding that center within yourself.
So it's more about how we react to things, not necessarily avoiding them entirely. Finding that balance in our response instead of always going to the extreme.
Exactly, like learning to ride the waves but not letting them capsize you.
Love that. So what does this mild and moderate approach look like in our everyday lives? Got any examples?
Tons. Let's say social media stresses you out, right?
Always a good example.
This approach might mean setting boundaries. Maybe you check it once a day, tops,
Yeah.
and you focus on real-life connections instead.
Right. Make it intentional.
Exactly. Or crazy work situation. Instead of panicking or burning the midnight oil, try a balanced approach. Set boundaries, talk to your boss. Remember, your worth isn't tied to your output.
Love it. And it applies to relationships too, right? Instead of riding that roller coaster of extreme highs and lows, maybe a Sufi perspective would say, build trust, communicate openly, and focus on that grounded kind of love.
Exactly.
This really gets you thinking about where you might be leaning into extremes in your own life, huh?
It does, for sure. But maybe even more important, it asks, what are we mistaking for the real thing? What toys have we gotten a little too attached to? Something to ponder as we navigate this loan we call life, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely something to think about. So for anyone just joining the party, 40 Rules of Love isn't like a how-to guide, thank goodness.
Definitely not your average self-help book.
More like each rule is a jumping off point, to ponder life, love, all the big stuff.
Which is what we're doing here, essentially.
Exactly. And this rule, this delegate thing, that's a heck of a springboard.
For sure. So how about we unpack what Shafak's getting at with this whole delegate business?
Okay, so when I hear delegate, I think like responsibility, someone entrusted with a mission.
Right, exactly. And not just any mission, right? She's saying we're entrusted by, well...
Capital G.
Exactly, which instantly elevates the stakes. It's not just about being a good person. It's about embodying something bigger.
Which honestly can feel kind of daunting. Like, am I living up to that?
It's a big question, for sure. And the excerpt our listener sent, it really digs into that feeling, right?
Yeah. Especially, I think, now. With everything happening in the world, it's easy to feel powerless.
Absolutely. And that's where this idea of being a delegate can be so potent. It's a reminder that we're not just along for the ride. We have agency, we have a role to play, even if we don't always see the immediate impact.
So how do we square that, right?
Right.
Feeling small, but also like we've got this huge purpose.
Well, that's where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
Because it's not about suddenly having all the answers or becoming some kind of superhero. It's more about the day-to-day, the small choices, the interactions, how we move through the world.
I like that. Makes it feel more manageable. Less about grand gestures, more about showing up authentically.
Right, exactly. And when you think about it, those small actions, they ripple outwards. Like how we treat that barista, even if they're having a rough morning, that matters. It sets a tone.
Totally. It's like that quote, how you do anything is how you do everything.
Yeah.
Suddenly, even grabbing coffee has cosmic significance.
Right. But seriously, it's about the intention behind our actions. Are we acting from a place of connection, of compassion, of that breath of God that Shafak talks about?
Oh yeah, that image. Breath of God. It's so vivid.
It's powerful, right? Makes you picture those old paintings, God touching atoms, sparking life.
Exactly. Like we carry that spark within us from day one.
And it's not something we earn, it's inherent. Just by existing, we have this connection to something larger than ourselves.
Which, again, can feel like a lot to live up to.
For sure. But I think that's where the idea of being a delegate comes in. It's not about being perfect, it's about striving, about asking ourselves in any given moment, what would a delegate do?
Love that. So it's not about judging ourselves for not being perfect delegates, but more like using that question as a guidepost.
Exactly. A way to check in with our intentions, to see if our actions are aligned with our values, with that inner spark.
And that final question in the excerpt, how often do you behave like a delegate? That's a good one to end on, don't you think?
Absolutely. Because ultimately, it's not about achieving some perfect state of delegateness. It's about the journey, the striving, the constant learning and growing.
And maybe, just maybe, by embracing this idea of being delegates, by trying to embody that divine spirit a little more each day, we can actually make a difference in the world. One small delegate-worthy act at a time.
I love that.
It's powerful stuff.
Yeah.
And it shows you the power of Shafak's writing, right? One rule can spark all these amazing internal conversations.
For sure. Definitely something to ponder.
And one rule that really stood out, Rule 24, talks about finding layers of meaning in, well, everything really, especially texts.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Layers of meaning, huh? Like what?
So it uses the Quran as an example.
Yeah.
Sufi scholars, they approach these sacred texts knowing there's not just one way to understand them. There are 4 levels of insight to uncover.
4. All right, you got to break this down for me. What's level 1?
Level 1 is all about that outer meaning. It's the most straightforward, surface-level stuff. Anyone can grasp it. Like, imagine reading a headline.
You get the gist, right? Just the facts, ma'am.
Exactly. But then things get more interesting.
Hit me with level 2.
Level 2 is where you got to think a little harder. This is the interpretive level.
Yeah.
You're going beyond the surface, asking questions, considering different angles.
So with that headline, maybe you think, okay, who wrote this? Is there some bias here?
You got it. Or you might consider the context, how different folks might interpret it differently.
Now we're cooking. What's next?
Level 3 is where you need your thinking cap on. Sufis call this the inner of the inner. This requires some serious knowledge.
So you need the background, the expertise, like reading a scientific paper, right? If you don't know the field.
You'll be lost. You might get the basic idea, but you miss the nuances, the deeper implications.
Makes sense. But that 4th level, the one beyond language, that sounds kind of mystical, man.
It is. It's all about personal spiritual insight, something you feel more than you can explain.
Whoa. So how does this, all these levels, how do they actually work in like everyday life?
Think of a tough conversation. Level 1, you're just hearing words.
Level 2?
You're picking up on tone, body language, emotions under the surface.
And then level 3, you're tapping into past experiences with that person. Maybe even some psychology knowledge, right? To really get their perspective.
Boom. And at 4th level, that's where real connection happens. Beyond words, pure intuition. Powerful stuff.
So to really, truly get something, are we talking reaching that 4th level, that indescribable understanding? Man.
That's the question, isn't it? What does it mean to truly understand? Something to think about.
So Rule 25, it's a powerful statement about heaven, hell, and get this, it says they're not in some distant afterlife.
Oh, I think I know where you're going with this. This rule is saying those ideas, heaven and hell, they're more about the present moment, right here, right now.
You hit the nail on the head. That's precisely what it's saying. Hell is in the here and now, so is heaven.
Whoa. Whoa is right. That's a big one. Flipping the script on everything we traditionally think about those concepts. What jumps out at you?
Well, it's like when I first read it, I was like, wait, it's not about some afterlife judgment. It's about how we're experiencing life right now. That's wild.
Right. And what's fascinating is this whole concept, it challenges us to really think about the choices we're making daily. Our actions, our thoughts. They're literally shaping our own personal heaven or hell in this very moment.
Exactly. And the rule, it doesn't stop there. It goes on to say, quit worrying about hell or dreaming about heaven as they are both present inside this very moment. So it's a call to action, isn't it?
It totally is. It's like, okay, we're creating our reality in each moment.
Yeah.
So the question becomes, what are we creating? Are we choosing actions and thoughts that cultivate a sense of peace, joy, connection, those heavenly qualities?
And on the flip side, are we getting bogged down in anger, resentment, jealousy, all those things that create, let's be honest, a pretty hellish state of mind?
And that's what makes this rule so powerful, right? It's not just some abstract concept. It's giving us a framework for living a more fulfilling life today. Not someday, but right now.
Totally. It's like that saying, holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. We're the ones who suffer. But the rule takes it a step further, right? It gives us concrete examples. It says, every time we fall in love, we ascend to heaven. Every time we hate, envy, or fight someone, we tumble straight into the fires of hell.
Oh, those examples are so vivid. And they bring it home, don't they? Think about it. Those moments when you're feeling love, joy, deep connection with someone, those really do feel like glimpses of heaven on earth.
You're so right. And on the other hand, when we're harboring hate, envy, getting caught up in conflict that creates suffering, not just for ourselves, but for everyone around us. And that's a pretty spot-on description of what we traditionally think of as hell, right?
Absolutely. And, this whole concept of heaven and hell in the present moment, it actually resonates with a lot of spiritual traditions, doesn't it?
It totally does. Like, in Buddhism, there's this idea about attachment being the root of suffering, attachment to desires, aversion to unpleasant experiences.
Right, right. And by letting go of those attachments, that's when we can find true peace and contentment. Not because our external circumstances are always perfect, but because we're choosing to approach them with a sense of awareness and acceptance. which is really what this rule is encouraging us to do, right?
It is. And the more I think about it, the more I realize just how profound this idea really is. It's like this rule, it's giving us permission to let go of those worries, those fears, those resentments that are weighing us down and preventing us from experiencing true joy and fulfillment.
And that's a really empowering message, don't you think? Because it means we have more control over our experience than we might realize.
So much more. And that's what I want listeners to take away from this deep dive. We can choose to create more heaven in our lives, starting right now.
And it doesn't have to be some monumental effort either. It can be as simple as practicing gratitude each day, approaching difficult situations with a little more patience, maybe even just taking a moment to appreciate the beauty around us. Those small shifts can make a world of difference. Okay, so ever heard of the butterfly effect, right?
Mm-hmm.
That whole thing where something small, like a butterfly flapping its wings, could actually cause a hurricane way over on the other side of the world.
Yeah. Wow.
Wow, that's right. And get this, today's deep dive takes that idea and kind of throws it into overdrive.
No. Yeah.
Yeah, we're talking about the idea that everything, and I mean everything, is connected. And the kicker, the source we're using to unpack all of this is, get this, a single rule from a book about, wait for it, love. Who knew, right?
Yeah, that's kind of a curveball. Which rule are we talking about?
All right, so it's Rule 26 from 40 Rules of Love. And this one, it really dives deep into this concept of interconnectedness. It talks about the universe as this one giant being.
One giant being.
Yeah, with all of us humans woven into it, part of this invisible web of stories, as the rule puts it.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Keep going.
So imagine it this way. Everything we do, every word we say, is that we're sending out these ripples, right?
Ripples.
Yeah, impacting the world around us.
Yeah.
And not always in ways we can see or predict.
It's funny you should put it that way. This whole thing about interconnectedness, about the universe being this one being, it kind of reminds me of how a lot of ancient cultures and philosophies view the world.
Oh, really? Like what?
Well, take the concept of karma, for example.
Okay.
That idea that what goes around comes around, that our actions have consequences that eventually find their way back to us. It speaks to this interconnectedness, this idea that we're not isolated actors in the universe.
That's actually a really good point. I never thought about it that way.
It even pops up in modern physics, like with quantum entanglement, where two particles, even separated by vast distances, can still influence each other instantaneously.
It's just that, wow, so much to process. This whole idea is making me think about how I interact with, everyone and everything.
Right.
And, okay, this part about silent conversations in the rule, that really got me.
Silent conversations. Tell me more about that.
So, the rule is suggesting that we're always communicating, even when we aren't saying a word. Our energy, our intentions, they're speaking volumes even in silence.
I like that. It's like we're always transmitting, whether we realize it or not, and everyone around us is picking up on those signals.
Yeah.
Kind of makes you think twice about the kind of energy you're putting out there, doesn't it? Are you radiating positivity or are you adding to the negativity?
It's definitely a good question to consider. And speaking of things to be mindful of, the rule talks about, get this, words being perpetually stored in infinite space.
Wow. It's like the universe itself keeps a record. Every word, every utterance just floating out there.
That's kind of how I imagined it, this infinite echo chamber. It makes you realize the power of what we say.
Absolutely. Every word has the potential to leave a mark,
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. A kind word, a message of support, even if it seems small, it can have a ripple effect. Just like a harsh word, a rumor, can spiral outwards and create so much negativity.
It's like that line from the rule, one man's pain will hurt us all, one man's joy will make everyone smile.
Right, it's all connected.
It's wild. Makes you think about those big social movements or global trends. If we're all connected, then a shared feeling, like a need for change, could, in theory, gain momentum, become this huge wave.
Exactly. And that's the empowering part of this whole concept, right? If our negativity can have a ripple effect, imagine what we can do when we consciously choose to focus on positivity, compassion, and action.
So, okay, how do we actually put this into practice if we really want to live by this idea of interconnectedness?
No, it probably starts with awareness.
Yeah.
Paying attention to the energy we bring into our interactions, maybe choosing our words more thoughtfully.
I like that.
It's about realizing that we're not these isolated islands, we're part of this giant, intricate tapestry. and we all contribute to the bigger picture.
It's a lot to process, this whole thing.
It is.
But there's something so hopeful about it, too. Knowing that even the smallest act of kindness, a moment of shared joy, it all matters.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
that, I think, is the core message of this rule.
Yeah.
It's a call to be present, to recognize our interconnectedness, and to use that awareness to make the world, even in the smallest ways, a kinder and more compassionate place.
Ever read something that just hits you, like, right between the eyes?
Oh, yeah, totally. Like you have to put the book down, you have to think about it.
Exactly. That's what happened when I stumbled on this rule, Rule 27 to be precise, from the book 40 Rules of Love. Talk about a head-scratcher.
Intriguing. What's Rule 27 all about?
It's about, get this, the power of words, like the words we speak and the thoughts we, well, think, and how it all comes back to us.
Okay, I'm intrigued. I mean, the idea that our words and thoughts have some kind of impact, that's not exactly new. Lots of spiritual traditions talk about that, right?
Right. But this rule frames it in a way that just, I don't know, it clicked for me. It's like a universal law of attraction thing, but it's deeper than just think positive and good things happen. It's more about, how do I put this? It's like our inner world shaping our outer experience.
You're right. It's more nuanced than that. It's about the energy we cultivate within ourselves directly influencing our perceptions. It's like this. Imagine shouting into a canyon. What happens?
The echo comes back to you, obviously.
Exactly. And that's what this rule is saying about our thoughts and words. They have that same echoing effect inside us. So every time we think something negative, even if it's just in our heads or we gossip about someone, we're essentially sending out that negative energy. And then guess what?
We become the echo. We're hit by the reverberation.
Precisely. We end up absorbing that same negativity. We become both the shouter and the canyon walls.
Whoa. So even if we think we're just venting, getting something off our chests, it's still seeping into us, becoming part of our own internal landscape.
Exactly. It's not just about what we put out into the world. It's about what we're feeding ourselves internally. And that's where this rule gets really interesting. It doesn't just stop at saying, okay, avoid negativity. It takes it a step further. It challenges us to actively cultivate positivity.
Okay, how do we do that? Because sometimes, let's be honest, positivity feels like a hard sell. Life throws curveballs.
I hear you, and the book acknowledges that, but it offers this radical idea, a 40-day experiment of sorts. It says, for the next 40 days, choose one person in your life, someone you have a hard time with, maybe someone who really pushes your buttons.
Someone you secretly dislike.
Well, let's just say someone you struggle to see positively. This could be anyone, right? A coworker, a family member.
Ooh, I know exactly who I'd pick. Keep going.
So you pick your person, and for 40 days straight, you commit to thinking and speaking only positive thoughts about them.
40 days. Wow, that's a serious commitment. What's so special about 40 days?
It sounds like a random number, right? But apparently there's this whole thing about 40 days being this threshold for change across different traditions and practices. Like it takes 40 days to break a habit, 40 days to form a new one.
Interesting. So is this about forcing ourselves to, like, this person we picked, even if every fiber of our being is like, nope?
Not necessarily. That's not the goal. It's more about shifting our internal landscape. It's not about magically changing the other person. It's about you undergoing a transformation.
By simply thinking good thoughts about them for 40 days.
Well, simply might be underselling it, but yeah. The book argues that by consistently choosing positive thoughts and words, even if we're faking it at first, something starts to shift within us.
Like we rewire our brains.
Exactly. Our brains have this incredible capacity for change. And what this rule suggests is that by consistently choosing positivity, we're essentially creating new neural pathways, making it easier to default to those positive feelings over time, like building a mental muscle.
So even if we can't control everything that happens to us, we can control how we respond to it, how we choose to think and feel about those events. And that's the key.
That's the powerful takeaway here. We have more agency than we realize in shaping our own reality, not in some magical wish fulfillment way, but in the way we choose to engage with the world around us and, most importantly, the world within us.
Sometimes I get so lost in thoughts about, what I should have done or what might happen that I completely forget to just, like, be here, in the moment.
Oh, I totally get it. It's like our minds are hardwired to dwell on the past or worry about the future.
Exactly. And that's exactly why Rule 28 from the 40 Rules of Love really made me stop and think.
This one's a real head scratcher, isn't it?
Yeah. It basically says, chuck your calendar out the window. Because the past is just how you choose to see it. The future is just, like a mirage. And the only way to find true enlightenment, and I'm quoting here, is to exist fully in the present moment.
Wow. That's a pretty powerful statement. Where do we even begin with that?
Right. It's a lot to unpack, but that's why we're here, right? To take a deep dive into this idea of time and eternity and how it all connects to finding, well, illumination, as they call it.
Let's do it. So, to start with, the rule really throws our usual understanding of time out the window, doesn't it? We're so used to thinking of it as this straight line, past, present, future.
Like a one-way street.
Exactly. But this rule, it suggests something different. It hints at time being more fluid, maybe even like a spiral,
Okay, a spiral, I like that.
where time is something we move through, not just alongside. What do you think about that?
It's like we're saying the way we normally think about time is just like a self-imposed limitation or something.
Right. And this idea of eternity not being infinite time, but rather a state of timelessness, that's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah, that part totally blew my mind. Because what does that even mean, to experience life outside of time?
Right. It's deep. But I think the rule gives us a clue when it connects this idea of timelessness to achieving eternal illumination.
So it's saying that when we're hung up on past regrets or stressing about things that haven't even happened yet, we're essentially blocking ourselves from experiencing that state of timeless eternity.
Exactly. And that's how we prevent ourselves from reaching that place of true illumination, that deeper understanding.
It's like we're so busy looking behind us or ahead of us that we miss the beauty and potential of right here, right now. Like this present moment is where that timeless experience actually exists.
Right. It's about being fully present in this moment. And the rule explicitly says that this present moment awareness is how we reach this eternal illumination.
Okay, I'm starting to see the connection, but how do we actually do that? How do we break free from constantly thinking about the past or worrying about the future and truly, like, live in the present moment?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Unfortunately, the rule itself doesn't really give us a step-by-step guide.
Yeah, no instruction manual for this one.
Right. But just by bringing it to our attention, by making us aware of how much mental energy we spend outside of the present moment, it gives us a starting point.
So just noticing when we're stuck in thoughts about the past or the future, that's the first step.
Absolutely. And there's actually a whole field of research dedicated to this, mindfulness. Studies show that practicing present moment awareness, even for a few minutes a day, can help with all sorts of things like reducing anxiety, improving focus, even helping us manage our emotions better.
You know, that reminds me of a time when well, it's not really important, but the point is, it's amazing how something as simple as shifting our focus can have a big impact on our lives. Yeah.
It really shows the power of perspective. And there are many practices that can help us strengthen that present moment awareness, like meditation, for example.
Meditation, okay.
It encourages us to simply observe our thoughts without judging them, noticing when our minds wander to the past or future, and then gently guiding our attention back to the present.
So it's like we're training our minds to be more present. And by doing that, we're opening ourselves up to that eternal illumination that Rule 28 is talking about.
Exactly. And while the meaning of illumination might be different depending on who you ask or what you believe, it often points to a state of clarity, of deep inner peace. And these are qualities that often blossom when we're truly present.
Wow. This whole conversation is giving me a lot to think about. It's like we spend our lives searching for some kind of enlightenment, looking for answers in the past or hoping to find them in the future when it's been right here with us all along. This potential for a more awakened way of being, hidden in plain sight within the present moment.
It's a powerful idea, isn't it? And it's definitely something worth exploring.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, why don't we all take a moment to be fully present, just for a little bit?
I love that idea. Let's just be here right now, see what we discover.
And this quote is actually rule number 29 in the book states that destiny doesn't mean that your life has been strictly predetermined.
Okay, interesting.
So I guess what I take from that is it's not like everything's set in stone, you know?
Right. It seems like what it's getting at is this idea that, a lot of people think destiny is this fixed thing. You're born and this is going to happen to you. That's going to happen to you. And really, it's about your level of participation, that it's sheer ignorance to just surrender to fate without actually being an active participant.
Right. So, I mean, if we're using the word destiny, then there is some sort of like, I don't know, plan or something out there. I mean, is that kind of what we're talking about? Or
Well, the book also uses this really captivating metaphor of the music of the universe.
okay, hold on. Want to hear more about that?
So the idea is that the universe's music is composed on like 40 different levels.
Wow.
And each person's destiny represents like their specific level, where they play their unique tune.
Okay.
So it's not saying that everything is predetermined as in you're going to do this and this and this, but more like you've been given this sheet music essentially, and it's up to you to play it.
Okay. So it's like we can't change the instrument that we're given.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we're born with certain talents or lack of talents or, certain circumstances, but we can control how well we play that instrument.
Exactly. Yeah. And, and how much we practice and the effort we put in.
Right.
All of that contributes to the quality of the music we create.
I remember a time when I was working this job.
Yeah.
And I felt like I was playing the wrong instrument.
Oh, yeah.
It was just like, this is not my tune. This is not my jam.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I actually like made a decision and I had to put in some effort, but to change paths,
Yeah.
And then things started to sound a little bit more harmonious to me.
Well, that's a perfect example, right? Like, it's not saying that you can just snap your fingers and change your circumstances, but it's saying that you can change your response to those circumstances. You can, try to learn and grow and become a better player of your instrument.
And to be honest, I never thought about destiny being empowering before.
Right?
But it kind of is, if you think about it that way, because it means that, yeah, okay, maybe there's this predetermined path, but I still have all this choice.
Exactly.
Still have all this responsibility to make the most of it.
It's not passive.
Yeah.
It's not saying, okay, well, this is it. This is all I get to do. It's an invitation to take what you've been given and make something beautiful out of it.
Right. And maybe even if you take it a step further.
Yeah.
Each of our individual tunes are kind of creating this larger symphony,
Right.
all together.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And how do those things affect each other?
That's interesting to think about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What happens when somebody's playing really poorly?
Right. Yeah.
Or not playing at all,
They throw the whole orchestra off.
Right.
Yeah. Is
But-
there a conductor? Are we all just kind of winging it,
I don't know, but it is really something to think about.
A lot to ponder.
Yeah. Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive.
Yeah.
And obviously just taking one quote, like this is not the end all be all.
Yeah.
There's so much more to explore with these ideas of destiny and free will and how we make choices and how our choices affect other people and how.
Right.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It gets really deep.
Yeah. But it all comes back to this idea of, if life is a symphony, what kind of music are you creating?
What kind of music are you making out there? Yeah.
For sure. So we're exploring this idea through a rule from the book, The 40 Rules of Love.
Okay.
And I'm going to read it to you here. It says, Rule 30, the true Sufi is such that even when he is unjustly accused, attacked, and condemned from all sides, he patiently endures, uttering not a single bad word about any of his critics.
Wow.
A Sufi never apportions blame.
Honestly, when I first read this,
Yeah.
I was floored.
Yeah.
Like, it's such a powerful statement.
It really does.
Yeah.
It really challenges like our default mode of thinking,
Yeah.
And it goes even deeper by asking this. How can there be opponents or rivals or even others
Right.
when there is no self in the first place?
Yeah.
How can there be anyone to blame when there's only one?
Okay, so like that no self part.
Right.
That's where I kind of get a little lost.
Yeah.
Help me understand this.
Yeah.
How can there be no self?
Yeah. So imagine like a drop of water
Okay.
falling into the ocean.
Uh-huh.
Does it retain its individuality?
Okay.
Or does it kind of like merge
Right.
and become like an inseparable part of something much greater?
So Sufism suggests that our individual sense of self,
Okay.
the me that we all kind of cling to,
Right.
is like that drop. It's an illusion.
Yeah.
It's like a temporary form in this much larger,
Right.
unified reality.
I see. So in that vast ocean of existence, where do blame and responsibility even fit in?
Yeah, that's a great question.
If we're all just drops in the same ocean, like, how can we even hold anyone accountable?
Right.
Like, doesn't this risk letting people off the hook for bad behavior?
Right. I think that's a question that arises a lot,
Right.
And I think the key here is that recognizing like the interconnectedness of everything
Okay.
doesn't negate individual actions or consequences, you know
Okay.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Instead, I think it shifts the focus.
Okay.
So instead of fixating on blame as like a way to isolate fault,
Mm-hmm.
we can see it as this opportunity
Okay.
to understand the complex web of like causes and effects that led to a particular situation.
So instead of saying like, he did this to me.
Right. It's more like it becomes more about
Yeah.
understanding how we're all part of like this intricate dance.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So this understanding,
Yeah.
it doesn't mean condoning harmful actions.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's not about saying that everything is okay, about recognizing that people act from a place of their own conditioning, their own experiences.
Wow.
And I think seeing through that illusion of like a separate self allows us to approach those really difficult situations with greater compassion and understanding
Okay.
without erasing like personal accountability.
Okay, so how do we actually apply this?
Right.
Like, this all sounds really great, like, in theory,
Yeah.
but in the heat of the moment, when someone, like, cuts you off in traffic
Right.
or forgets that, like, super important deadline,
Yeah.
how do you actually stop yourself from, like, having that knee-jerk reaction to blame?
Yeah, that's where like the real work begins, you know?
Yeah.
And Sufism, like many spiritual traditions,
Uh-huh.
emphasizes practices like meditation and mindfulness
Okay.
as ways to kind of chip away at that illusion of a separate self.
Gotcha.
And I think the more we connect with that inner stillness,
Okay.
the less reactive we become to those external events.
Uh-huh.
And we start to see that blame is often like a projection of our own inner turmoil.
So it's like that saying, like, holding on to anger
Exactly.
is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And I think it's about recognizing that blame ultimately harms us
Right.
more than anyone else.
Uh-huh.
And it keeps us trapped
Okay.
in these cycles of anger
Yeah.
and resentment
Right.
and separation.
Yeah.
And embracing this Sufi perspective,
Right.
it's about cultivating a different way of being in the world.
Okay. One
One rooted in understanding and compassion.
This has been like a really insightful deep dive.
Thank you.
You've given me a lot to think about.
I appreciate that.
It is a challenging perspective,
For sure.
but also incredibly liberating.
Yeah,
You know?
absolutely.
Yeah. So, listener, as you go about your day, consider this.
Yeah.
What if, instead of seeking someone to blame, you looked for, like, the connections,
Right.
the underlying causes and effects?
Yeah.
How might that change your interactions, your relationships,
Yeah.
even your own sense of self?
Absolutely.
Food for thought.
Yeah.
So we're diving into Rule 31 from the 40 Rules of Love.
Okay. Yeah.
It's all about spiritual growth and, well, love, as you might guess.
Right.
And this rule, it says softening, actually makes your faith stronger, not, hardening yourself.
Interesting.
So that's what we're looking at. How can being more, I guess, vulnerable actually make your faith more resilient?
Yeah, it's a real head scratcher, isn't it? You'd think it'd be the opposite. Like, you got to be tough, unbreakable, right?
But this Rule 31, it's saying real strength in your faith. It's not about building those walls. It's more like creating the right space inside where love and understanding can grow.
So it's not about being a pushover or anything.
No, not at all.
Right.
When we say softening, we're talking about being more empathetic, kinder, but also there's this element of being able to bounce back from stuff emotionally.
I see, yeah. Like, imagine a willow tree, right? Bends with the wind instead of snapping like an oak tree.
Okay, yeah, I get that. Strength and flexibility.
Exactly.
But what does this softening inside actually look like, in everyday life?
Good question. Let's say you're in a disagreement with someone. Maybe they see things totally different from you.
Right.
Softening could mean you really listen to them, even if it's hard. Instead of just shutting down or getting defensive.
Yeah.
Choosing, like understanding instead of judgment.
It's funny you say that. I remember this one time, I was so sure I was right about something. I barely let the other person talk,
Oh, yeah.
And looking back, I think my faith would have been stronger if I'd just been a little more humble.
That's a great point. And it's not just this book, this Sufi tradition. A lot of spiritual paths talk about this idea.
Really?
Yeah, they say that facing these tough moments, when you choose to soften instead of harden, it actually deepens your connection to something bigger than yourself.
So it's like a spiritual practice almost.
Exactly. And it's tied in with personal growth, too. Life throws you curveballs, right?
Yeah.
Illness, loss, heartbreak, all that.
Yeah, for sure.
And these things, they can either make you bitter and cynical, or they can kind of crack you open in a way. Let in more compassion.
Because you see how vulnerable everyone is.
Yeah, you recognize that shared vulnerability.
So in a way, admitting you're not invincible, that makes your faith stronger. Because you're not pretending anymore.
Right, exactly. And there's this great quote in the book that sums it up. The only way to get closer to truth is to expand your heart so that it will encompass all humanity and still have room for more love.
Wow.
It's about opening up, not closing off.
So what we're learning here is that real strength in our lives and in our faith, it often comes from being softer, more compassionate, even when that seems backwards.
Yeah, it's counterintuitive.
It's about expanding your heart, not building walls.
That's the key. And it makes you think, right, how can you practice this softening today? Where in your life could a little more understanding and compassion create a stronger connection?
We've been exploring the whole idea of personal faith, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, this excerpt from Elif Shafak's The 40 Rules of Love, it's Rule 32 to be exact, really jumped out at me. It says, nothing should stand between yourself and God.
Ooh, that's a powerful statement. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, it's bold, a little mysterious, and I think it might even make some people uncomfortable, you know?
Yeah, I can see that. It definitely challenges some traditional views on religion and spirituality.
Exactly. So let's unpack this together. What do you think Shafak means when she says nothing should stand between yourself and God?
Well, I think she's really emphasizing the importance of a direct personal connection with the divine. Like, it's not about relying on intermediaries or external authorities to tell you about God, but rather experiencing that connection for yourself.
So it's about cutting out the middleman, so to speak.
Exactly. It's about having your own authentic experience of the divine, unfiltered by dogma or tradition.
That makes a lot of sense. And it also makes me think about how we sometimes get so caught up in rituals, doctrines, all those external things, that we might actually lose sight of the essence of faith itself.
Right. It can become almost like an idolatry, making a fetish out of our beliefs, rather than focusing on the underlying truth they're supposed to represent.
Shafak actually uses that word fetish, which I found really interesting. Why do you think she chose such a strong word?
I think it highlights the danger of clinging too tightly to any one interpretation, even a spiritual one. It's about the potential for rigidity, becoming so attached to our beliefs that we close ourselves off to new understandings and growth.
So how do we find that balance then? How do we hold on to our values and beliefs without building walls around them?
It's a lifelong journey, for sure, and it takes conscious effort.
I can imagine. Where do we even begin?
Well, a willingness to be a student, always open to learning and growing, is crucial. And there are practices that can help us create space for that inner reflection and exploration.
Like what kinds of practices? Give me some examples.
Well, meditation is a great one. It helps quiet the mind and allows for deeper introspection. And then engaging with diverse spiritual perspectives can be really eye-opening. Reading different texts, listening to different teachers, even just having respectful conversations with people who hold different beliefs can challenge our assumptions and help us see things in a new light.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's not about abandoning our faith, but about approaching it with an open mind and heart, right?
Absolutely. I love that idea of approaching faith with an open heart. I think that's key.
It makes me think of that saying, the truth is a constantly unfolding tapestry, We never quite grasp the whole picture, do we?
Exactly. And that's okay. In fact, I think that's part of the beauty of it.
For sure. So let's bring this back to our listeners. If they're resonating with Rule 32 and this idea of a direct connection with the divine, what are some things they can do to cultivate that in their own lives?
Well, first, I think it's helpful to reflect on the beliefs you hold dear. Like, what are the core values that guide your spiritual journey? And then ask yourself, am I open to the possibility that my understanding of these beliefs might evolve over time?
It's a great question to ask. And honestly, it can be a little scary too, right? Because we want to be grounded in our values, but also recognize that we don't have all the answers. How do we reconcile that tension?
It definitely takes courage, but I think humility is essential. Recognizing that our perspective is just one thread in a much larger tapestry can help us navigate those challenging conversations and be more open to diverse viewpoints.
Like that idea of iron sharpens iron, right?
Yeah.
We need those different perspectives to help us refine our own thinking.
Exactly. But as you said, it does take courage because those conversations can be uncomfortable sometimes.
So, any advice for navigating those potentially tricky waters?
Well, approaching those conversations with a genuine curiosity and respect for the other person's perspective is key. Remember, you don't have to agree with someone to learn from them.
That's such a good point. Sometimes we go into those conversations trying to prove our point or change the other person's mind, but that's not really conducive to true dialogue and understanding, is it?
Not at all. Sometimes the most profound insights come from those moments when we're willing to just listen and learn, even if it challenges our existing beliefs.
So to bring it all back to Rule 32, it seems like it's not just about removing obstacles between ourselves and the divine, but also recognizing the obstacles within ourselves, our own rigidity, our fear of the unknown. What do you think?
Absolutely. That's such a powerful insight. And it really speaks to the essence of what Shafak is saying, I think. It's about cultivating a faith that is both strong and flexible, rooted in personal experience, but also open to the ever-evolving nature of truth.
Beautifully said. So, as we wrap up our deep dive today, any final thoughts for our listeners who are continuing on their own journeys of exploration?
Be patient with yourself. It's a process, and there's no right or wrong way to go about it. Stay curious, never stop asking questions, and remember that the journey itself is just as important as the destination.
And maybe even more so, right?
Exactly. And as you navigate your own path, I'll leave you with one final question to ponder. How can you cultivate a strong sense of personal faith while remaining open to the diverse and ever-evolving nature of truth?
All right, so welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to get into like one of the most, I don't know, I think fascinating and kind of most paradoxical ideas from the 40 Rules of Love,
Okay.
which is, this whole concept of achieving nothingness.
Ooh, I
And,
like it.
I think it's really interesting because, so much of what we talk about on this show and so much of like, I think, just Western thought
Right.
in general is like, be somebody, do something, achieve things,
Just your mark.
make your mark, have a legacy, all of that stuff.
Right.
But the 40 Rules of Love is saying, what if true fulfillment lies in embracing emptiness?
Yeah, it's really a fascinating paradox. And the 40 Rules of Love, as you know, draws heavily from Sufi philosophy.
Yeah.
And in that tradition, the idea of nothingness isn't about becoming empty or lacking personality,
Yeah.
right? It's about letting go of ego. It's about letting go of this constant striving for external validation.
Yeah. And Rule 33, spells it out pretty explicitly. It
does.
And it uses this analogy of a pot
Yeah.
where, the value of the pot isn't in the decoration, it's in the emptiness of the pot, which allows it to hold something.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And in the same way, it's our inner emptiness that holds the potential for consciousness, for connection with, something greater than ourselves.
Right. So it's not about becoming like just a blank slate.
Yeah. No.
It's about creating space
Yes.
for something deeper to emerge. But I'm curious, like how do we we talk about the ego a lot, and it's something that we've talked about in terms of like needing to kind of like rein it in and all this other stuff.
Yeah.
But isn't the ego isn't there a part of the ego that's like necessary for setting goals and achieving things in life? Like how do we reconcile that with this idea of striving for nothingness?
That's a great question. And you're absolutely right. It's not about erasing the ego
Right.
entirely, right?
Yeah.
It's about recognizing its limitations.
Okay.
The ego, yes, can drive us to achieve, to acquire,
Right.
but it can also trap us in this cycle of desire and dissatisfaction,
Yeah.
right? So striving for nothingness
Yeah.
is about shifting our focus inward
Okay.
and cultivating a sense of contentment
Mhm.
that isn't dependent
Right.
on external achievements.
This reminds me of a friend of mine who she was like obsessed with the
Yeah.
time of the corporate ladder.
Right.
And she finally landed like her dream job, high powered position, huge salary, all this stuff.
Yeah.
And then like a few months into it, I was talking to her and she was like, I'm so unhappy. She's like, this isn't what I wanted. Like she got it and it was like, it was empty.
It's so common. We think we desire something, we work for something, we strive, we achieve, and then when we get there, we're like, wait,
This isn't it.
this isn't it.
What now?
Yeah, because true fulfillment comes from a deeper place, from aligning with our authentic selves, not with these external markers
Right.
of success.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about aligning with our authentic selves.
Yeah.
Because I feel like this idea of inner emptiness as a source of potential, like you were talking about,
Yeah.
really seems connected to mindfulness practices. Like,
Absolutely.
like is achieving this nothingness
Yeah.
similar to like the state of mind that you try to get to when you're, meditating or something.
Absolutely. Mindfulness practices like meditation, they encourage us to empty the mind of thoughts,
Right.
of distractions, to cultivate a state of pure awareness.
Yeah.
And it's this emptiness
Yeah.
that allows us to connect with our inner selves,
Yeah.
to experience the present moment without judgment or
Yeah.
attachment.
So in a way, it's almost like embracing nothingness isn't about becoming passive or inactive. It's about actively cultivating a different kind of awareness
Yes.
that's focused on
Exactly.
inner growth rather than
External validation.
exactly. And this shift in perspective can have profound implications for our lives and for society as a whole.
Right.
Imagine a world where people are less driven by material possessions, by status, by,
Yeah.
those things,
Yeah.
and more focused on cultivating inner peace, compassion,
Right.
connection.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a really powerful vision. And I think for, for everyone listening, the key takeaway here is really to reflect on your own life and goals and what are you striving for? And is it truly bringing you fulfillment? Like if
Yeah.
you were to let go of the need for external validation,
Yeah.
what would you fill that inner emptiness with?
Mm.
What passions, what values would guide your actions?
It's an ongoing process
Yeah.
of self-discovery, of peeling back the layers of conditioning and societal expectations to connect with the core of who we truly are.
Yeah.
And within that nothingness, you might just find everything you've been searching for. We're
Okay.
looking at this through the lens of Rule 34 from the 40 Rules of Love.
Okay.
And we're going to be looking at a particular excerpt from Text Kale.
All right.
And this rule is all about the idea that true power
Mm-hmm.
can actually come from submission.
Okay.
So the rule states,
Okay.
submission does not mean being weak or passive.
Right.
It leads to neither fatalism nor capitulation, just the opposite.
Okay.
True power resides in submission,
Interesting.
a power that comes from within.
Okay.
Those who submit to the divine essence of life will live in unperturbed tranquility and peace, even when the whole wide world goes through turbulence after turbulence.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
it's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, it is.
When we talk about submission in this context,
Mm-hmm.
what exactly are we talking about?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Because it's well,
Definitely not the typical way
right.
the typical way we think about the word, right?
Exactly.
It's not about like giving up or being weak-willed or anything like that.
Right.
This is about something much deeper.
Yeah.
It's about aligning yourself with a force that is bigger than yourself.
Okay.
The rule calls it the divine essence of life.
Right.
Now, that might sound kind of mystical or whatever,
Right.
but you can think about it as like
Yeah.
tapping into this universal energy, this natural flow of things. Imagine like a tree bending with the wind instead of trying to resist it.
Mm-hmm.
There's a certain strength in
Yeah.
that surrender.
Okay. So it sounds like what we're talking about then is not becoming passive,
Exactly.
but finding a different kind of strength.
Yes.
A strength that maybe comes from letting go of this need to control everything.
Yeah, like recognizing that there are forces at play in the universe that are much bigger than us as individuals.
Right.
And sometimes
Yeah.
the wisest thing, the most powerful thing you can do is to actually harmonize with them.
Okay. But how does that translate into inner peace?
Yeah.
Like,
Well, think about it.
does that really work?
I mean, when we're constantly trying to force things to go our way,
Yeah.
when we're fighting against reality,
Mm-hmm.
that creates a lot of internal friction and stress.
Right.
It's exhausting.
Yeah, it is.
Right.
Totally.
But when we can learn to accept
Yeah.
what is,
Mhm.
to kind of go with the flow,
Mm-hmm.
to trust the process,
Okay.
it frees up so much energy. There's less resistance,
Yeah.
less anxiety,
I like that. So it's almost like we're trading in this
Yeah.
illusion of control that we have
Yeah.
for the reality of peace.
I think that's a really beautiful way to put it.
And this rule talks about finding this peace
Right.
even when the whole wide world goes through turbulence after turbulence.
Exactly.
Which suggests that this isn't about
Right.
ignoring the problems of the world
Yeah.
or pretending that everything's fine.
It's not about sticking your head in the sand.
Right.
It's about having an inner strength that allows you to weather the storms
Yeah.
without being completely swept away by them.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It makes me think about all the different areas of my own life
Yeah.
where I'm really trying to control things.
Yeah.
And, maybe white-knuckling it in certain areas
Right.
when maybe there's a better way.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of real-world examples,
Yeah.
where could this mindset of submission
Yeah.
actually be helpful?
Well, let's say you're dealing with a health challenge, for example.
Okay.
You could spend all your energy fighting against it, denying it, stressing out about it,
Right.
or you could choose to surrender to the expertise of your doctors, to the process of healing,
Right.
trusting that you're being guided towards the best possible outcome.
Okay.
That doesn't mean you're giving up.
Right.
It means you're choosing to focus your energy on what you can control,
Right.
your attitude, your choices,
Yeah.
your inner state.
That's such a good point.
Right.
It makes me think about how
Yeah.
I've often resisted situations rather than surrendering to them and maybe trying to find a lesson
Exactly.
or an opportunity
Yeah.
within that situation.
It's a powerful shift in perspective.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
I do wonder, though, if we're talking about submission,
Yeah.
are there any downsides?
Sure.
Like, could it lead to complacency
Yeah.
or letting important things slide?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
And it is important to remember that this rule is
Yeah.
not saying to blindly accept everything that comes your way.
Right.
This type of submission.
Yeah.
It's not about being passive or ignoring injustice.
Right.
It's about choosing your battles wisely
Okay.
and recognizing that sometimes it's more powerful to go with the flow than to fight against the current.
Okay, so to everyone listening,
Yeah.
think about your own life for a second.
Mhm.
Where are you holding on to tightly?
Right.
Where could a little bit of surrender
Yeah.
actually bring you more peace,
Yeah, exactly.
more strength, or even a better outcome?
Right.
All right, so we've been talking today about this idea that true power can actually reside in submission,
Yes.
as described in Rule 34. It's about aligning ourselves with something larger than ourselves,
Yeah.
letting go of the need to control every little thing, and finding that peace and that resilience
Absolutely.
in the midst of all the chaos.
Yeah.
I think that's a really powerful message.
It is.
And one that we could all probably benefit from hearing.
Definitely.
So
Yeah.
if true power really does come from this kind of submission,
Mhm.
what does that say about our usual obsession with control?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
What could we achieve?
Yeah.
What might we become
Right.
if we learned to actually let go a little bit more?
That's something for all of us to think about.
Definitely.
So today we're diving into something kind of wild. This idea that, well, this inner battle might actually be the secret to becoming the best version of ourselves.
That's a good way to put it.
We're using the 40 rules of love as our guide, especially Rule 35.
Which digs into this whole concept of how embracing our inner contradictions can actually, well, help us grow.
So it's not about picking sides, squashing one part of yourself to let the other win.
Nope. This rule is saying true growth comes from acknowledging all these different, sometimes opposing forces inside us. And get this, embracing them.
That's pretty radical when you think about it.
It really is. And the book uses this term in Santa Camille to describe, well, they call it the perfect human being.
Insani Camille. Sounds
Yeah.
kind of, I don't know, mythical.
Yeah, it does have that ring to it. But the idea is that this state of wholeness, this perfect human being, isn't achieved by getting rid of our contradictions.
But by bringing them together.
Exactly. Integrating them.
So how would a person like that, someone embodying this Insani Camille idea, actually act in everyday life? What would that even look like?
Okay, imagine someone who can, say, face a tough situation with both logic and intuition. Someone who's both tough when they need to be, but also kind and compassionate. Someone who can be disciplined, stick to a plan, but also be spontaneous, go with the flow when it's called for.
That's a lot to juggle.
It is. But they wouldn't be trapped in rigid patterns, They could adapt to whatever life throws at them.
That makes sense. It's not about becoming perfect in the sense of being flawless or always right.
Right. It's more about developing this inner flexibility, wisdom even.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this all fits together. It's like you need both sides of the coin to really understand the value of each.
Exactly. And this idea, it's not brand new. It's found in tons of spiritual and philosophical traditions.
Oh, yeah, like what comes to mind for me is that yin and yang symbol.
From Taoism. Yeah, that's a great example. It shows how things that seem opposite are actually connected. And even more, they're essential for harmony.
You need both. Light and darkness, right?
Absolutely. And Rule 35 takes this concept even further, applying it to the idea of faith.
Okay, this is where I got a little tripped up, to be honest.
Yeah, it can be a head scratcher.
It says faith needs its opposite, disbelief, to actually exist. How does that even work?
It seems backwards, right? But the book suggests that questioning and doubting, instead of being like the enemies of faith, can actually be crucial steps in its development.
It's like those moments when you're really wrestling with uncertainty that your beliefs actually get stronger, more, I don't know, resilient.
Exactly. It's in those moments of doubt that our faith is tested and, if it survives, refined, leading to, well, a more mature and resilient faith.
So you're saying you can't fully appreciate the light unless you've experienced darkness.
It's the contrast that gives it meaning. And this idea, honestly, it applies to so much more than just faith.
Like what?
Well, think about creativity. Sometimes the most groundbreaking ideas, the really innovative stuff, comes from embracing limitations, challenging the way things have always been done.
That tension, that push and pull between what is and what could be,
Yeah.
that's where the magic happens.
You got it. It's like the friction sparks the inspiration.
Okay, this whole conversation is making me think about all those times I've felt this inner tug of war myself. You know, those big life decisions. Should I play it safe or take a risk? Or even those everyday choices. Should I follow my head or my heart?
Those are the moments that define us, right?
And man, they can be exhausting. But maybe, like you're saying, those struggles are actually a good sign.
Absolutely. Think of them as opportunities, chances to learn more about ourselves, to figure out what we truly value, and, to develop the skills we need to handle whatever life throws at us.
I'm starting to see those inner opposites in a whole new light.
That's the goal. This whole deep dive was about getting us to think about those contradictions, not as something to fear or suppress, but as something essential to who we are.
This has been, wow, really insightful. I know I'll be pondering this for a while.
Me too. And here's a question for everyone listening. If embracing those inner contradictions is the key to growth, what opposite do you need to acknowledge, maybe even explore within yourself today?
It's not about getting rid of one side or the other, but about finding a way for them to work together.
To create a more complete, a more authentic you.
Something to think about for sure. All right, welcome back, everyone. We're diving into something pretty thought-provoking today.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So remember that book, The 40 Rules of Love?
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's this rule about reciprocity, right?
Yes,
And it got us thinking.
for sure. It's a powerful idea.
Basically, it's like what goes around comes around.
Exactly. Every action creates a reaction.
But it's deeper than that. right?
Absolutely. The book really emphasizes that.
It's not just about good deeds being rewarded. It says even things like if someone's plotting against you,
Yeah, any negative action.
that even that will somehow be returned.
Right. It's like a universal balance.
It almost sounds like there's this cosmic justice system, you know?
It's a fascinating concept, isn't it? And a lot of cultures and philosophies actually touch on this idea.
Oh, interesting. So it's not just this one book's unique perspective.
Not at all. The idea of reciprocity, of balance, it's pretty universal.
So how does that actually work, though?
Well, it might not always be immediate or obvious, right?
Yeah.
It's not always like, you do something bad and bam, instant karma.
Like a cartoon anvil falling on your head.
Exactly. It can be much more subtle, a lot more nuanced.
Okay, that makes sense. It's more like a long game.
I think that's a good way to put it. It's about long-term consequences and a kind of ripple effect.
So instead of worrying about what others are doing,
Yeah.
the book says we should really focus on our own actions.
Exactly. It's about taking responsibility for your side of the equation.
And trusting that that the universe will handle the rest.
Precisely. And this really ties into the whole concept of karma,
Right.
because even those seemingly small acts of kindness,
Like holding a door or something.
exactly,
Sure.
those can actually have far-reaching positive consequences, creating a more positive environment, not just for yourself, but for everyone around you.
Interesting. So have you ever seen that play out in your own life?
Oh, absolutely. I think we all have those moments where, you do something nice for someone, and then unexpectedly, something good comes back to you.
You get that good karma boomerang.
Exactly.
But okay, here's something that kind of tripped me up.
What's that?
The book also says, not even a leaf stirs outside God's knowledge.
Mm-hmm. It's a powerful line.
Yeah, but doesn't that imply that even our smallest actions?
Are being observed.
Yeah, like even if I accidentally cut someone off in traffic.
You think it's being noted somewhere.
Yeah, it's like tallied up on some cosmic scorecard.
That definitely brings up questions of fate versus free will, doesn't it?
Right. Because if a higher power is aware of everything,
Does that mean our lives are already predetermined?
is it all just destiny?
Or do we still have the power to make choices within this system of reciprocity?
That's a big question, isn't it?
It is.
So, like, do you think it's possible that this awareness of a higher power watching everything could actually be what guides us to make better choices?
That's an interesting perspective. It's like this cosmic accountability.
Yeah. So maybe we should try to forgive others more easily too, right? Knowing that any wrongs will ultimately be balanced out by this.
This universal system.
Exactly.
It certainly offers a different way to think about forgiveness.
Yeah, for sure.
But this whole idea of cosmic justice, as appealing as it may sound, it can get tricky.
Yeah.
Because we all know that,
Sometimes bad things happen to good people.
Exactly. And good things happen to, well, let's just say not so good people.
That's true.
Yeah.
It makes you question the fairness of it all.
Absolutely.
But then the rule ends with this beautiful line. Whatever God does, he does beautifully.
Yes.
There's something kind of comforting about that.
Even when things seem uncertain.
Yeah, even in the midst of all the chaos.
It suggests a sense of trust, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Acknowledging that even when things seem totally random, there's a larger order at play.
So for everyone listening, the big question here is, how do we apply this idea of reciprocity to our own lives?
Yeah.
Knowing that every choice we make, every action,
Creates those ripples.
yeah. How does that knowledge influence the decisions we make every day?
I think it encourages us to be more mindful,
Yeah.
To really consider not just the immediate impact of our actions, but the potential long-term consequences as well.
So thinking beyond ourselves.
Exactly. And maybe it inspires us to really cultivate kindness and generosity, knowing that those actions can have a ripple effect that extends far beyond ourselves.
That's a great takeaway. Thanks for joining me for this deep dive into the world of reciprocity.
My pleasure. It's a concept that I think we could all keep exploring.
Definitely. It's something to really think about. Okay, so today we're going to deep dive into this whole idea of divine timing, and we're taking a cue from rule number 37 in the 40 Rules of Love.
Okay.
And it's an interesting one. I think everyone listening has probably pondered this at some point.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, are things just happening randomly, or is there like a plan? Is there something bigger going on?
But is it fate or free will?
Yeah, exactly. Like, how much control do we really have over our lives?
Mm-hmm.
So this rule uses this really striking image to describe God. It talks about God as a meticulous clockmaker.
Oh, wow.
What kind of imagery pops into your head when you hear that?
I mean, a clockmaker, I think of someone who's very precise.
Right.
Like everything has its place.
Yeah.
Every gear, every spring, like it all works together perfectly.
Yeah, like an intricate system.
Yeah, exactly. And I
Yeah.
think that's what this metaphor is getting at. The
Yeah.
idea that the universe is this incredibly complex clock, and even the tiniest things are important. Even the things that seem random or chaotic might actually be part of this bigger picture.
That makes sense. And the rule goes on to say that, everything happens in its own time, not a minute late or early.
Oh, interesting.
Have you ever felt that, like, in your own life, like things just happened at the perfect moment?
Oh, absolutely. Or even the opposite. Like sometimes it feels like the universe is testing you.
Right, throwing obstacles in your way.
Exactly. Like, why is this happening now?
Yeah.
But then later on, you look back and you're like, oh, okay, it actually all makes sense now.
Yeah, it all kind of falls into place.
Right.
It's like that saying, hindsight is 20/20.
Exactly.
But it does make you wonder about that whole fate versus free will thing.
It does.
If there's this divine timeline, does that mean we don't have any choices?
Right. Are we just puppets?
Like, is everything predetermined?
I don't know. It's a tough question.
Yeah, it's a big one.
It's a big one, but maybe it's not so black and white. Maybe
Yeah.
there's a balance. Like maybe there's this plan, but we still have the freedom to choose how we respond to things.
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah.
And then there's this last line in the rule that really got me thinking.
What's that?
It says, for each, there's a time to love and a time to die.
That's powerful.
Yeah. It's like, whoa.
It really makes you think about the big picture, doesn't it?
Yeah, like love and death, those are two of the most fundamental human experiences.
Absolutely.
And to think that they might be preordained,
Mhm.
it's kind of mind-blowing.
Yeah. I mean, for some people, that might be comforting.
Yeah, like a sense of peace.
Right. Like knowing there's a plan.
Yeah.
But for others, it might be really anxiety-provoking.
Yeah, like, are we really just living out a script?
Right.
It's a lot to process.
It is.
I mean, when you really think about it, maybe this whole rule isn't meant to be taken so literally.
Mm.
Like maybe it's not about an actual clockmaker in the sky.
Yeah, maybe it's more metaphorical.
Yeah, exactly. Like
Mhm.
maybe it's just a way of saying that life has its own natural rhythm, its own ebb and flow.
And we can learn to trust that rhythm.
Yeah, like maybe instead of trying to control every little thing, we could just try to go with the flow.
I like that.
Yeah, it's an interesting way to look at it.
It is.
So thinking about this whole idea of divine timing,
Mm.
I wonder if there are any times in your own life where you felt like something happened at just the right moment or maybe even at the worst possible moment.
Mm.
And what did you learn from those experiences?
That's a good question. I think it's worth reflecting on those moments for sure.
Yeah, because maybe those moments are trying to teach us something.
Exactly.
So to wrap things up today, I think we can all agree that this whole concept of divine timing is pretty complex.
Definitely.
It's one of those things that's open to interpretation, but it definitely gives us a lot to think about.
It does.
So here's a final thought for everyone listening. If you were to view your life as a meticulously crafted clock, how would that change the way you see each moment? And how would it influence the choices you make? Yeah, it's something to ponder.
It is, for sure.
All right, so we're back for another deep dive.
Yeah.
And today we're going to be looking at
Rule 38
Rule 38.
from the 40 Rules of Love.
Right, and it's all about transformation
Mm-hmm.
and, changing your life.
Yeah, it asks a pretty powerful question, actually.
Oh, yeah, it really does. It says, are you
Mhm.
ready? Are you ready to change your life?
And yourself, even.
And yourself. I mean, wow, that is such a huge question. What do you think when you first hear that?
It's interesting, because I think it applies to anyone.
Uh-huh.
Like, no matter where you are in life,
Right.
it's something we can all ask ourselves at any point. Are we ready to change?
Yeah. It's like a call to action almost.
Yeah.
And the source material even talks about, the tragedy of living the same day over and over again. Like, we should always be seeking that renewal, being reborn with every breath.
Right.
And it even gets into this idea of dying before death.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, that sounds kind of intense, right?
Well, it's not about literal death.
I hope not.
No. It's more of a metaphor, It's
Right.
about shedding our old selves, like
Oh, I see.
letting go of the stuff that's holding us back,
Mhm.
like those old habits, those limiting beliefs.
Like those things that are really keeping us from growing.
Exactly.
So I guess it's kind of like, you're attached to an idea or a belief,
Yeah.
and maybe it's not serving you anymore.
It's holding you back.
It's holding you back.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to, I guess, let it go, kind of like a death.
Right. And that can be so hard.
It is.
But it makes space for something new.
That's a good point. Like, I used to be terrified of public speaking.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah. It was bad. But I kind of had to let go of that fear,
Mm-hmm.
to move forward in my career.
And that's a great example of this dying before death.
Yeah.
You had to let go of that old version of yourself
It was like a death.
to become who you are now.
So I guess this idea, this dying before death,
Mhm.
it's really about making a conscious choice.
Yes, absolutely.
Just like actively choosing to let go.
Of the things that are preventing us from evolving.
Right, even if they're, comfortable or familiar.
Exactly. And it's really about becoming our truest selves.
That's a good point. Like, this isn't just about, like, becoming something, quote unquote, better, right?
No, not necessarily.
It's more about becoming who we're really meant to be,
Yeah.
which I guess can take, a lot of different forms.
So many different forms.
So it's about identifying those parts of ourselves, like, what do we need to let go of?
Right.
How do we even start to, like, figure that out?
Well, there are tools,
Okay.
things like journaling can be really helpful.
Yeah.
Meditation, therapy, those can all help us, like, understand ourselves better.
To kind of get to know those parts of ourselves that maybe we haven't fully acknowledged.
Yeah. And then we can start to figure out what we need to let go of.
So it's not just about death, it's also about rebirth. There's something on the other side.
Exactly.
Like when we shed those old layers, what happens?
It opens up space for something new.
Mm.
New possibilities, new perspectives.
It's like we're making room for growth.
It's like a caterpillar transforming into a butterfly.
Oh, yeah.
It has to go through this radical transformation
It has to completely change.
to become this beautiful new creature.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes, personal transformation,
And it's not always pretty.
yeah, it can be messy, right? It's not always a straight line.
No, it can be challenging.
So it's not just about becoming this beautiful butterfly.
It's about becoming our authentic selves.
Mm-hmm. Which can be, beautiful in its own way,
Absolutely.
but it might not look how we expect.
And it might not be easy.
So this deep dive, it's really about letting go
And embracing the unknown.
of those old patterns, those old beliefs.
Make room for something new.
Yeah. And to grow into who we're meant to be.
What do you think you're ready to let go of?
That's a good question. What about you?
Well, I think for me, it's about letting go of the need to control everything.
Oh, yeah. I see.
I like to be in control, but sometimes I have to surrender
Yeah.
and trust that things will work out.
And that's hard, right?
It is, but it's also very freeing.
It's like we're learning to let go and embrace the possibility of becoming something new.
Exactly. And that possibility, that's what makes this whole process so exciting.
So what do you want our listeners to walk away with today?
I want them to ask themselves, what part of yourself are you ready to let go of?
And to remember, letting go can lead to amazing new possibilities.
And those possibilities, those are what make life worth living.
So let go and see what amazing things you can become. Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're going deep on a concept from Sufism,
Okay.
and it's all thanks to you. You sent us this passage from the 40 Rules of Love,
Right.
specifically Rule 39, that really got us thinking. It talks about how everything changes, but also kind of how everything stays the same. It's pretty mind-bending.
Yeah.
Are you ready to explore a bit of Sufi wisdom with us?
Absolutely. I'm excited to dive in.
Okay, so to refresh everyone's memory, the passage uses this example of thieves and decent people. And it says that for everyone who leaves this world, another one takes their place.
Huh.
It almost sounds like a paradox when you first read it.
Yeah, it does.
Can you help us unpack this idea a little?
Sure. So, this rule really gets at the heart of how Sufis view the cycle of life, death, and rebirth.
Okay.
Now, just to clarify for anyone who might not be familiar, Sufism is a mystical branch of Islam,
Right.
and it really emphasizes this inward search for truth and divine love. Like, imagine a journey to connect with your inner self and with a higher power. That's a big focus in Sufism.
I see.
And this rule that we're talking about highlights how even though individual forms, like you and me, are temporary,
Right.
there's something deeper, like an essence of humanity that persists.
So I'm thinking about this idea of essence versus form.
Right.
Can you break that down a bit more for us? Like, how does that relate to our everyday lives?
Well, think about your own life, right?
Yeah.
You've grown and changed so much over the years, I'm sure.
Oh, absolutely.
But with all those changes, don't you think there's something fundamental about you that's always been there? Maybe it's your values, your capacity for love, your sense of wonder.
Yeah.
That's what Sufis might call your essence.
I like that.
It's a really beautiful concept when you think about it.
Yeah. So even though it looks like things are constantly changing on the surface, there's this underlying current that actually connects us all.
Exactly. It's like the waves in the ocean, right?
Okay.
Each wave is unique, but they're all part of the same ocean.
That's a good analogy.
And, you mentioned that line from the passage, for every Sufi who dies, another is born.
Yeah.
That points to the continuation of this spiritual lineage, this shared search for truth and connection that keeps going.
That makes me think about how even though people, come and go,
Right.
their impacts and the ideas they share, those can live on.
Absolutely.
I'm curious, what are your thoughts on this whole idea of constant change within this unchanging whole?
Well, for me, it's a really powerful reminder that we're all part of something so much bigger than ourselves, this continuous flow of existence.
Yeah.
And I think it invites us to really connect with that deeper essence within us,
Right.
and then to try and recognize it in others, too.
That's beautiful.
It really is.
It's really humbling, too, when you look at it that way.
Yeah.
This whole idea of interconnectedness also makes me think about the concept of reincarnation,
Okay.
which is found in many spiritual traditions.
Mhm.
That takes the idea of a cycle even further.
Right. It does. Reincarnation suggests that maybe, that essence we were talking about could be reborn into new forms.
Okay.
And it carries forward the lessons and experiences from past lives. It's a really fascinating concept.
Yeah, it is.
It really encourages us to think about the continuity of consciousness beyond just one lifetime.
There's so much to think about here. Thank you for sharing all of this with us today.
Oh, it's been my pleasure.
I think we all have a lot to ponder after this one. And for those listening, if this idea of continual replacement and maybe even reincarnation resonates with you,
Yeah,
I encourage you to do a little digging on your own. You might be surprised by what you find.
you really might. And you might find that exploring these different perspectives changes how you see the world and your place in it.
It's a good reminder that learning never stops. Okay, so today we're diving deep into love,
Love.
which is maybe the biggest topic ever,
You
right?
could say that, yeah.
We asked for some interesting sources on love,
Yeah,
and
we're
we
a good
got
bunch.
we got flooded with suggestions. This one in particular, Tex Kale,
Yeah, very interesting.
stood out because it took a really unique approach. I don't know if unique is the right word, but
Definitely, it's its own thing, its own take on this.
and that's what we're here to explore, right? Like, what is this source's perspective on this huge thing that is love?
Right, and hopefully by the end of this deep dive, we'll all have a better understanding of what it is.
Or maybe more questions than we started with.
That's always possible.
That's always possible. Okay, so Tex Kale lays out all these rules about love, 40 rules to be precise.
Yeah.
And it's that last one, rule number 40, that really hit us hard.
Oh yeah, the mic drop.
It is the mic drop for sure.
Life without love is meaningless.
Whoa.
Right.
Yeah, that's
I mean,
it definitely stopped us in our tracks.
I think that a lot of people would agree that love is important,
Sure. Right.
but to say that life is meaningless without it is pretty...
It's a big statement.
It's a huge statement. Yeah, a very bold statement. And it makes you wonder, like, what is the source getting at? What makes love so crucial to them that they're willing to declare that all of life is meaningless if you don't have it?
Yeah. It's like they're saying love isn't just this like nice thing to have. It's fundamental, right? To like everything.
Right. I mean, I think that's the main takeaway here, right? It suggests that love isn't just some fluffy feeling, but like you said, it's a driving force. It's something essential to a meaningful existence. And that actually connects to a lot of philosophical and religious traditions around the world.
Oh, interesting.
So it's not a completely new idea, but it's definitely presented in a very stark, no-nonsense way here in this text.
And they don't stop there.
No, they keep going.
They go on to say that all those ways we usually categorize love, like spiritual versus material, divine versus mundane, they say that's all wrong. Like all those labels are meaningless.
They're saying we're boxing love in.
Right. Putting it in boxes,
Yeah.
which just leads to needing more boxes.
Right, exactly. You make one box and then you realize, well, this doesn't quite fit, so we need another box and another and another.
And it just gets more complicated, right? Like it just moves us further away from actually understanding what love really is.
Right, it becomes this intellectual exercise instead of a genuine experience. It's like we're trying to dissect a butterfly with a scalpel. You might learn something about its anatomy, but you've lost the beauty and the essence of the butterfly in the process.
I like that.
So this source is really urging us to kind of step back from those categories, to stop trying to define love so rigidly, and to just be open to the experience of it.
To let ourselves feel it no matter what box it fits in.
Exactly.
Because at the end of the day, love is love.
Yeah.
Right? Whether it's romantic or platonic or whatever else.
Yeah, and this idea of love as something that transcends categories, that's something that a lot of, philosophers and mystics have talked about for centuries. Thinkers like Rumi, for example, he talked about love as this all-encompassing force, as this unifying principle in the universe.
So this source, even though it lays out these rules, in a way, it's almost like it's pointing beyond rules, beyond any kind of system we can come up with.
Right, because love is inherently a bit messy, isn't it? It doesn't always fit neatly into our preconceived notions, and that's okay. In fact, that might be the whole point.
It's about being okay with the messiness.
Absolutely.
And the source uses this metaphor to really drive that point home.
Okay.
And it's a good one, so buckle up. Love is the water of life, and a lover is a soul of fire. The universe turns differently when fire loves water.
Whoa.
Right?
Okay, so let's break this down a little bit. First of all, you've got these two seemingly opposite elements, right? Fire and water. They're these primal forces, and they seem like they would clash. But when they come together, when fire loves water, it's like the source is saying that something completely new emerges, something transformative happens.
Something powerful, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think this metaphor is trying to capture the intensity, the energy, the almost alchemical nature of love. It's not just about two things coming together. It's about them coming together in a way that changes everything.
So maybe the takeaway here is that love is about embracing those differences, those seeming contradictions. It's not about finding someone exactly like you, but about finding someone who complements you, who challenges you, who helps you grow in ways you never thought possible.
That's a great way to put it, yeah. It's about letting go of control, of expectations, and just allowing yourself to be swept up in this powerful, transformative force.
I love that. It's about letting go. Because sometimes that's when the most amazing things happen.
Exactly. So to wrap things up here, I think it's safe to say that Text Kale is calling for a pretty radical rethinking of how we view love. It's asking us to move beyond those neat categories and labels and to experience love in its purest, most raw form.
And it's not giving us a roadmap. It's not saying, here's how to find love.
Mm.
It's more like it's pointing us in a direction and saying, go explore.
Exactly.
And maybe what you find will surprise you. Maybe you'll discover love in places you never expected.
Right, because love is everywhere. It's in the kindness of strangers, in the beauty of nature, in the art we create, in the connections we make with each other. It's in the everyday moments, as well as the grand gestures.
So yeah, if you're out here searching for love, maybe the best advice is to stop searching so hard and just open your eyes.
To be present, be open, be receptive.
Exactly. Love might already be right in front of you.
And that brings us to the end of this deep dive.
And what a journey it's been.
Yeah, it's been great exploring this topic with you.
Likewise.
So as always, keep those sources coming. We love diving into them with you. And who knows what other mysteries we'll uncover together. Until next time, see you then.